Somewhere in the middle of the city, in one of the gray buildings, someone was shouting his disagreement. A soul suddenly entered the peacefully sleeping boy with ash-blonde hair. This man woke up suddenly with anxiety in his eyes. He sat up in bed in panic, trying to figure out what was going on. In an attempt to calm down, the boy breathed deeply, holding his forehead with his hand. The blonde tried to remember what had happened, and feeling the warmth of his body, he realized that he was not dead yet. He looked at his hands and found no calluses on them. His skin was the same as it had been 10 years ago. After looking around the room, the guy realized that he was in the same university dormitory where he lived many years ago. He suddenly turned around, removing the pillow that had the phone underneath. It was 4 o'clock in the evening, and its screensaver featured a long-haired blonde. Having unlocked the phone, the guy turned on the front camera and pointed it at himself. He was surprised to see a young face without scars. Now the blonde was sure that he had been reborn, returning to the day when the Doomsday Game appeared. The guy locked his phone, remembering some of the previous events. He was annoyed because right before his reincarnation, he had just become a 10th rank war god in the Dragon Country. Then, 2 gods of war from the neutral camp invited the guy to the celebration, and during their conversation, they were suddenly invaded by the zombie emperor. When the blonde fought with him, betrayal happened. The war gods joined the emperor and then killed the guy. Surrounded by traitors, he lay in a cold sweat and bled. At this moment, a girl came out to them and congratulated Lin Ziluo on becoming the god of war, and then asked him if he liked the gift from the Lee family. Lin looked at her and was overcome with anger. Yao Jinghan, by bringing the zombie emperor, not only reached an agreement with the Lee family, but also completely blocked the legendary world. This girl was the first beauty of their university, and out of all the possible lucky ones, she chose the blonde, which made him incredibly happy. However, at that time, Lin had no idea that before the Judgment Day, the master of the Lee family had given her the task of getting closer to the guy, and all in order to use it to expand the territory of this family's possessions, and then get rid of Lin. The Lee family belonged to the 3 major clans of the Dragon Country, and their influence could not be underestimated, but by sacrificing his appearance, the blonde was able to escape from their clutches, being on the verge of death, and spent the next 10 years hiding from their mercenaries. He was killed after all, and now, having returned 10 years ago, he sat in a dormitory and burned with hatred for Yao. The guy was sure that if the girl had not been protected by the Lee family, he would have been able to take revenge on her. Since the blonde was reborn before the end of the world, and Yao did not become his girlfriend, he still had the opportunity to deal with her beforehand. Suddenly, a notification sound rang out, drawing Lin's attention to the phone. A message from Yao appeared on the screen. The girl warned that she would not be able to celebrate her birthday with the blonde today, as she had to teach children. However, the guy believed more that she was conducting classes for Mr. Lee in his bed. He put the phone down and slammed his fist on the bed, outraged by such a gift. Lin wrote to Yao that there was nothing wrong with it, and, since she had things to do, suggested meeting at an abandoned warehouse behind the sports ground, noting that he missed her. Yao agreed to this, surprised by the meeting place, and warned that she would need to leave before 6 o'clock, to which the guy replied that he had a surprise. The blonde wondered why Lee Hobbo hated him so much, guessing that it might have been because of Lin's father, who died too early. The boy was looking forward to celebrating his first birthday with Yao with all his heart. But in the end, he received a shameful video of congratulations, and because Lin was bullied, he missed the best time to come of age. But in his new life, the blonde was not going to repeat all these events, deciding to take revenge on his offenders. Finding himself on the street with a briefcase on his back, Lin overheard the conversation of passers-by, one of whom was surprised at how frighteningly red the sky had turned. Another replied that such a phenomenon, according to one weather forecaster, happened only once every 5,000 years, and advised not to worry, but to admire the beauty. But Lin knew that the bloody sky was a harbinger of the beginning of the Doomsday Game, which at 7 o'clock was supposed to change reality, turning the whole world into a huge game, and not everyone would be able to survive in the altered reality. The blonde was already near the abandoned warehouse. He placed his hand on the metal door, trying to control his anger. Then the doors swung open, revealing Lin's silhouette to the girl. Yao sat on a chair under the light of a single bulb. She was outraged by his late arrival and asked him to tell her about the surprise quickly. And at that moment, Lin was hiding a knife from her in his sleeve. Smiling kindly, the blonde asked Yao not to worry, because she would soon find out everything. The girl looked with displeasure as the guy silently approached her. She said that she would leave if the blonde did not explain what was going on. Suddenly, Lin grabbed Yao by the throat, causing her to stand up and feel terrified. Her phone fell out of her hand, falling to the floor and bouncing. The The girl looked at the guy in panic and, grabbing his hand, asked him to let her go. Then the blonde said, March 16th, 478, 53239 yuan at the Devil Hotel. March 29th, 478, 29984 yuan at the Emperor Kai Hotel. Lin took out a knife, and Yao told him to stop muttering under his breath and again begged him to let go. Then the guy repeated the last words again. These dates and names of hotels seemed familiar to the girl. The blonde continued, April 13th, Ghost Nightclub, 409,999 yuan. And at that moment the girl realized that he was listing the places where she had made love with Hobbo. Yao then told Lin that she would explain everything. The guy grinned and asked how she would do it. Without letting go of the knife, the blonde picked up the girl's phone. She wanted to take it away, but Lin continued to hold the girl by the throat, clicking on the screen. In his phone, he found correspondence with Hobbo, who asked if Yao had told the blonde that she would not spend the day with him, and also asked if she had prepared a gift for Lin, to which the girl replied that the guy believed the lie and the gift was ready. Lin was in no hurry to put the phone away, deciding to do one more thing. Realizing how much dirt there was, Yao became more and more nervous. The guy kept fiddling with the gadget, holding the girl by the shoulder. The blonde found one video, which he immediately turned on. Then he said, Lin Ziluo, you're a wimp, happy birthday, and the same words were repeated in the video. Think about it. Why would the most beautiful girl at the university date a poor wretch like you? You're an orphan, and you have nothing but a pretty face. Tears were already welling up in the shocked Yao's eyes, and she couldn't understand how the guy knew everything. The blonde continued, If Mr. Lee didn't need you, I wouldn't even look at you. The girl was puzzled that Lin knew all the words from the video that Yao recorded for Hobbo. Putting on the same happy face that she had on the phone screen, the guy said, If it weren't for you, Mr. Lee wouldn't have chosen me, and I wouldn't be enjoying all this luxury now, so thank you very much. The girl sat back down in shock. The blonde's hand moved from his shoulder back to his neck. Lin then suggested that Yao was wondering how he knew all this. She trembled with fear as the boy's grip loosened. Then the girl tried to push his hand away, but the blonde shouted, Go to hell and think about it, after which he swung the knife, wishing her death. Then the blade passed straight through the girl's hair and throat. This didn't seem enough to the embittered Lin, and he struck again. The next moment, Yao's dead body fell to the floor, blood splattering. The guy shuddered, sighing heavily, and the backpack slowly slid off his shoulder. The shock made the blonde's legs give way and he fell to his knees. Looking at the floor, Lin muttered about the 10 years he had lived, and then he laughed with a hint of madness. As he laughed, tears of joy ran down the guy's face. He was happy that he was finally able to deal with Yao and avoid many years of torment. However, the blonde understood that this was not enough. After all, his list of enemies also included Hobbo and his family, who were hiding in their estate. Suddenly, a blue transparent square appeared, in which it was written, Congratulations to the owner on his rebirth. The trainer system of the game, Doomsday, is activated. Lin glanced at his phone, which showed the time was 6 o'clock. But the day of judgment was to come at 7 o'clock, and now the blonde was wondering where this system, which he had never heard of before, had come from. This system provided data about the Doomsday game and also brought the owner of the system a better gaming experience. Everything around suddenly turned blue, and running numbers and letters appeared. The next rectangle indicated that the introduction to the system was complete, and the first game reward could be received. Then a loading screen appeared, showing how much of the reward had been downloaded. She had the skill, Absolute Explosion. That is, when killing any zombies, the benefit from the explosion of objects increased from 1 to 100%. The system reported that when killing one zombie, it was necessary to detonate one item, which synthesized 1%. Killing a large number of monsters was equal to a low probability of survival. But Lin was sure that his own experience couldn't compare to all these numbers, so it sounded unconvincing. The guy wondered if this could really be trusted. He clicked on the levitating flat rectangle and a new list appeared in front of him. It contained information about the blonde's level 0, with a note that with every 10th level, one super trainer of the system could be activated, while Lin already had Absolute Explosion, but did not have a regular trainer or any task. Seeing all his parameters, the guy was amazed. The system stated that every time the owner completed a task from it, he would receive a regular trainer in the form of a weapon, item, and other rewards. After this, the blonde man became curious about whether he would be able to overthrow the Lee family thanks to this system. These people could not be underestimated, because they had not only a huge number of well-trained warriors, but also secret techniques for hardening the body. So after the Day of Judgment came, they were able to extract a lot of benefits and strengthen their power. Lin was never able to find out why Hobbo hated him, and the only way to do that was to infiltrate his family. The blonde planned to kill this man and then gradually strengthen his powers. But since the guy now had a system, he could become much stronger in a shorter time and then destroy all his enemies. Leaving Yao's bloody body in the warehouse, Lin left the warehouse, planning to exterminate the Lee clan. People on the streets admired the beauty of the scarlet sky as a gloomy blonde man walked past them. The couple smiled sweetly, took photos, and planned how they would spend time together. Lin looked at them with displeasure, knowing that these people were enjoying love now, but would soon start killing each other. The guy arrived at one of the hotels to rent a room by the hour, and also to buy 3 bottles of water and 5 buns. The blonde wanted to prepare right away and stock up on food in case the system turned out to be unreliable. The hotel manager, looking at an erotic magazine, said that a single room would cost 40 yuan an hour. Buns were 3 yuan, and water was 2. While taking out the money, Lin also asked for girl number 3 to be brought to him. Time passed, and the guy was already waiting in the room, lying on the bed. There were only 5 minutes left until 7 o'clock. Last time, girl number 3 became the main zombie boss in this area, and after she transformed, Lin killed her right there. This time he could figure everything out faster and get the reward, while also checking the system. Approaching the door, the girl announced that she had arrived, and the blonde allowed her to enter. When she saw him, she was glad that the guy was handsome, after which, swaying her hips, she came closer to Lin. The girl sat down on the edge of the bed and asked why the blonde hadn't undressed yet. She began to take off her pink top, asking the guy to be faster because she had to serve another client. Continuing to lie calmly on the bed, Lin told the girl to go take a shower. She obeyed and went into another room, after which the guy sat down. He felt the girl smell like a zombie, as signs appeared before the end of the world, which could tell who would turn. Taking a knife out of his backpack, the blonde headed to the bathroom. Hearing his footsteps, number 3 looked at Lin, still standing with her back to him. She said she was confident that the guy should have wanted to play with her. Having turned off the water and wrapped herself in a towel, the girl invited the guy into her shower. However, he was in no hurry to approach, hiding a knife in his sleeve. Suddenly, number 3 shuddered, feeling something strange. Her veins were bulging, turning black, and blood was seeping through the towel. She grabbed her head and screamed, feeling the terrible changes in her body. And Lin at that moment calmly watched the transformation of the trembling girl. Number 3's eyes became bloodshot, his teeth became fangs, and his skin turned a greenish-gray tint. She went crazy, turned into a zombie, and tried to attack the guy. However, the armed blonde, without further ado, slashed her throat with a blade, after which the girl fell heavily to the floor. She didn't move anymore, being dead. Feeling relieved at having eliminated his opponent, Lin exhaled. A blue circle suddenly appeared under his feet, and the system welcomed him to Doomsday. The game had already begun and stopping was not possible, and all players had to develop independently. The zombies in this world had keen hearing but poor eyesight, so they could only spot moving targets. 80% of the people in this world were turned into zombies, while the rest were much luckier. And the main goal of the game was survival, and after death it was impossible to continue the game. In order for the game process to be more successful, the system offered to familiarize itself with the rules. By killing people and animals that had turned into zombies, the player would level up and receive new items, with game experience and level being closely linked. By killing zombies, you could get equipment, items, and material resources. Information about higher levels has been omitted as unnecessary. The system explained that there were hidden opportunities everywhere that required special attention to be paid to finding. Modern technology was now useless, including communication devices, as all communication technologies created interference, but the player could keep the phone to read books and play games. The only way to turn into a zombie was through a bite or a wound, and nighttime increased their basic characteristics, and they could also evolve over time. There was a lot more that could have been said, but they didn't do it. Since the zombies were very weak now, the system advised to kill as many of them as possible, after which it wished a pleasant game. Next, a board appeared in which you had to enter the player's name. Then the guy wrote down the simple name Yazi. He decided to change his name and begin his journey of revenge. The system congratulated the player who became the first to kill a zombie and achieved the best result on this planet. First drop of blood. And this information was available to everyone. And also for the murder, the blonde received 1 experience point, 1 coin, and moved up to the 2nd level. Zai was glad that he had finally achieved a result that would be published, because he had fought all his past life and even became a god of war. But he had never been rewarded like this. Around the world, players who were running in panic from zombies were told that Yazi was the first to achieve the best result. The owner of light brown hair and glasses with a red round frame, Ji Yao, had just finished studying the instructions at this moment. Gu Gaoji, who had just killed a zombie with a bat, was curious that someone had beaten him to it. Meanwhile, Z was still in the same room looking at his characteristics. Strength affected attack power and physical strength. Energy affected skill release ability, recharge time and frequency of use. Body quality affected survival and defense ability, and speed affected reaction. The guy's energy and speed were great, and he also had epic level talent, which he would not have been able to achieve in his past life even in 10 years. The blonde also received reputation points and coins, as reputation was required for some types of equipment, and the store often had discounts. But the most important was the title First Drop of Blood, thanks to which, with a daily kill, the power of damage increased by 100%, and 4 attribute points should increase it many times more. Looking into the bathroom, Z discovered one more thing. On the floor next to the corpse lay a box containing a basic level meditation pendant, which when used increased energy by 1 point and increased the speed of energy recovery by 10%. The blonde was delighted that the 100% explosion reward worked, and he immediately won the bronze equipment. The system asked not to forget about it, and to use the trainer wisely, to which the guy lifting the pendant replied that he understood everything and could not help but take advantage of such a chance. Before the 8 hours passed, after which the zombies became stronger, Z decided to kill even more living dead, and he decided to start with other rooms in the hotel. That's why the blonde walked along the corridors with concentration, not letting go of the knife. And at some point his attention was drawn to a sound coming from one room. The guy approached her slowly, on bent knees, and trying to make as few sounds as possible. Then the guy grabbed the door handle, listening to the noise. And the next moment he kicked the door, behind which there was a zombie. After conversion, people retained some of the characteristics they had during life, and this one seemed to do a lot of physical labor. Even though the enemy's stats were a couple of points higher than those of other zombies, Z was confident that he could easily deal with him. Waving his arms, the living corpse attacked the guy, who managed to dodge. Then the blonde crouched down, and the zombie continued to try to attack. However, Z immediately stabbed him in the neck with a knife, pinning him against the wall. The zombie groaned but was not about to give up, still having the ability to move. Then the guy gave him another blow to the throat, and for a better effect, he twisted the knife, causing the blood to flow out many times faster. Contorting his face, the zombie jerked his hand one last time and fell dead, and the blonde received 1 experience point and 1 coin for the kill. Zai was unhappy that he had not done very well this time, as he was unable to kill with 1 blow. A box with a material resource appeared next to the zombie. Inside was a card of beef fillet steak prepared according to a special recipe from Donglan County, with the addition of specially prepared soy sauce, and when activated, the steak should appear in the player's hands at the optimal temperature. Now this material resource was valuable, but when the store opened it would only cost 100 coins. The guy opened his backpack and a board with empty squares appeared in front of him. Then he placed a steak card in one of the slots. Leaving the zombie lying in a pool of blood, the blonde entered his room. There lay the dead man's bag, in which Z began to rummage around in search of something useful. He pulled out a photograph of a once happy man who had later turned into a zombie, holding his little smiling daughter in his arms. Also in the bag was a hammer with a sticker of a pink rabbit, which suggested that the deceased was a repairman. The blonde continued to examine the rooms one by one. However, he still couldn't come across a zombie. Approaching room number 206, the guy heard sounds that belonged to the living dead. Happy to have another job, Z began to break the lock with a hammer. Then he kicked the door open and said, "Open up, this is a fight against prostitution." What he saw in this room somewhat puzzled the guy. 2 zombies were on the bed, clearly engaged in obscenity. Out of embarrassment, Z even left the room, closing the door. During this time, he forgot that he was in a love hotel. Looking into the room again and annoying the living dead, the guy was surprised that, even though they had turned into zombies, they had not forgotten how to do this. The presence of the blonde man outraged the male creature, and it attacked Z. The guy jumped back, concluding out loud that he had disturbed the couple. This zombie's stats were 2 points lower than the workers, but he was so desperate to deal with the blonde that Z thought he was being too daring. And then he hit the living dead man's head with a hammer, and he completed the attack with a knife blow to the eye, after which the zombie fell back due to the death that had overtaken him. With one deft movement of his hand, the blonde changed the position of the knife, after which, without turning around, He stuck it into the throat of the zombie girl, who was very close. For the double kill, Z received 2 experience points and 2 coins. 2 boxes materialized nearby once again. Seeing the double reward, the blonde was overjoyed, realizing that the system was telling the truth about a 100% explosion. In his previous life, after killing 100 zombies, he could only get half a bottle of water. But this time, he was incredibly lucky. Opening the cases, the guy was happy that he was lucky. 2 explorers' eyes fell out of the Zai boxes, which were bronze-level disposable tools that could help explore the environment within a radius of 10 meters, and one use was enough for 10 hours. Rejoicing at such a reward, the blonde was already thinking about how he could use the item. The hotel administrator climbing the stairs was outraged that someone was making noise upstairs. Seeing the guy in the corridor, the pot-bellied man expressed his displeasure at the fact that some poor guy was making such a noise. He demanded that Z kneel down and beg for forgiveness, or the administrator would throw him out. But the guy didn't react in any way, and the man tried to hit him. But the blonde calmly dodged this waving of his arms, causing the man to fly past. At the same time, the guy hid his knife behind his back. The administrator was angry that some scum dared to hide from him, and declared that he would find him and deal with the blonde. However, when he turned around, he was faced with Z's predatory gaze. The blonde was thinking out loud that it would be worth waiting an hour until the administrator was bitten by a zombie, and only then kill him. However, in that hour, the guy could have killed much more, so he didn't want to waste time on the man. Then Z slashed him with a knife, splattering blood everywhere. He understood that in the new world, the one who had the stronger blow survived, and this was not at all about the administrator of the Love Hotel. Knocking on the door of one room, Z said that he had come to clean the drains, but there was silence. Knocking on another door, he said he had to fix the bed, but there was no answer there either. There was no one in the third room either. Ruffling his hair, the blonde began to worry that no one was answering him. Continuing to wander the corridors, Z finally heard another zombie. The guy was glad that he was finally able to find another living dead person. He didn't hesitate and immediately knocked down the door. There was a 2-meter-tall zombie in the room, showing the blonde his aggressive smile. Z attacked him with a knife, but the dead man managed to dodge. Because of this, the guy couldn't stay on his feet and fell on all fours. Although the zombie was quite large, it still had good speed. The blonde delivered his next blow with his feet, standing on his head, after which he deftly turned over, assuming a sitting position. He then stabbed the living dead man hanging over him. The zombie growled in pain and the dead body fell to the floor. This time, Z got Fady and vodka. The guy took it, smiling and thanking the dead man for his help. Then the blonde began to carefully search the room, but did not find anything he needed. He walked through a few more rooms and stopped at room 201. It was here that Z was planning to spend the night today. The guy sat down on the bed with white linens and took off his sweater. He had already relaxed at the moment when the system announced that he needed to gain 6 experience points to advance to the 3rd level. The blonde quickly took out his phone to check the time. Seeing that 8 o'clock would arrive in 20 minutes, he became alarmed. Zai quickly descended the stairs, hoping to find 6 more zombies to move on to the next level. He ran past the reception desk, where a curious sign was displayed. It said, "Girl number 3 will serve you at any time you wish." This announcement made the blonde stop and think. If there were only 3 of them, and the guy only killed 2, that meant there was still 1 girl left. According to the game settings, zombies came out towards the sound. So Z decided to make noise with a hammer to attract the attention of the living dead. The sounds of zombies came from a room whose entrance was curtained with fabric. Pushing her aside, the blonde entered the room. However, after looking around, the guy didn't find anyone. But suddenly, knocking sounds were heard from the closed hatch behind him. Z opened the small square door in the floor, indignant at how far the last girl had gotten. A pair of zombies were climbing up the wooden stairs from the basement. But at some point, the first zombie's hand slipped, and the dead man flew straight down, knocking down his girlfriend who was crawling after him. Smiling nervously, the blonde noted how hard the dead men were trying. Then the guy, not caring about the presence of the stairs, jumped down. Z stabbed the zombie girl with all his might, and she had no chance to escape. However, from behind, another living corpse was reaching out its dead hands towards him. The blonde reacted instantly to this, stabbing the knife into his opponent's neck. Turning around, the guy pressed harder on the weapon to make sure the zombie died. The system announced that the slain dead had brought 2 experience points, and in order to move on to the 3rd level, 4 more points remained to be obtained. Z noted that his knife had become dull, and hoped that the game would give him a new weapon as a reward. Suddenly, a bright light shone nearby, alarming the blonde. This is how the Tang sword appeared, and it shocked the guy, who thought that his thoughts were material. Having picked up his new murder weapon, he was also pleased that, in addition to the steak, he would have 2 flavorful buns without filling for dinner. The Tang sword was a bronze-level weapon developed during the Tang dynasty in the Dragon Country, with a length of 70 centimeters, as well as high durability and the ability to pierce armor. This sword, which added 1 point to strength and gave the ability to weaken the enemy's defense by 10%, gradually recovering after the battle, could be acquired later. But now the thing was only for Z's benefit. Now there were already 3 items in his backpack. There were only 10 minutes left until 8 o'clock, so the guy hurried back up. Then he walked out of the building, looking around the area with satisfaction. 4 zombies walked past the blonde man on the street. Z clenched his fist, pleased that he would still have time to move to the next level. The guy attracted attention and the living dead immediately headed in his direction. Wanting to taste his delicious flesh, they quickened their pace. The blonde stepped back a little into the building, and 2 zombies suddenly stumbled in the passage. Another couple of zombies came up and also fell to the floor, and Z realized that he had overestimated the mental abilities of the first day's dead. In his past life, on this day, the guy was sitting in the room and thinking that his life was over. And on the second day, the zombies had already moved on to the next level. And now the blonde regretted that he had missed such a good time because of some nonsense. Z raised his sword, preparing to attack, waiting for all the zombies to stand up. Then he quickly walked over all the dead with his weapon. Turning around and seeing that all the zombies had been destroyed, the boy noted that the quality of the sword was indeed excellent. The blonde managed to collect the required number of points to move to the next level and received 1 free point to the characteristics, which he was very happy about. And before the next promotion, it was necessary to gain another 30 experience points. Hearing footsteps at the entrance, Z looked in his direction. There was a zombie girl walking there who didn't trip, and the blonde was even glad that a dead person with at least some intelligence had finally come to him. She came too close, and Z, who had pierced the zombie's head with his sword, was even worried that he would get bitten. Then a new item fell out of the corpse. Happy about this, the guy immediately took his reward. He was surprised that he received the skill book so quickly. Suddenly, the alarm clock in the blonde's pocket started playing. He announced that it was exactly 8 o'clock. Zai turned off the sound and then something alerted him. The guy got nervous and immediately jumped back. And in the place where he had previously stood, a zombie suddenly appeared. It was larger and stronger than the previous ones, since at night the zombies received more different buffs. Their body characteristics increased, and it became more difficult to defeat such undead. In front of the guy was a tall, muscular dead man with eyes burning with malice. The zombie's strength had increased to its maximum in just 1 minute, and now Z warily held his sword out in front of him. The blonde had to deal with him within the next minute, so the guy swung his sword and plunged it into his opponent's neck. However, the blade got stuck before it even reached the middle. Zai tried to take out the weapon, but to no avail. The dead man's eyes widened and his mouth began to open. Fearing a bite, the blonde jumped back several times. Then he quickly took out a hammer from his backpack. Pulling his hand back with the tool, the guy shouted for the zombie to die. After that, Z threw the hammer straight at the dead man. The tool hit the zombie right in the head, spraying blood. While the living dead was distracted by the hammer, the guy tried to grab his sword. And the next moment, he managed to pull the weapon out of his opponent's neck. The tool fell, and with it, the zombie ended up on his knees, bleeding. The dead man stared at the blonde with his burning eyes. As the corpse began to stretch out its cold hands towards Z, its face became even more eerie. There was a zombie in front and a wall behind, so there was nowhere to run. So the blonde man, holding the sword with both hands, swung. Channeling all his power into the blow, the guy slashed the zombie in the neck. The dead man, whose stats had already reached their peak, fell noisily to the floor, hitting his head. If it weren't for Z's experience and the fact that he had time to prepare, the guy would have lost. Since it was already 8 o'clock, the stats of all the zombies outside had increased by at least 50%. The blonde had been fighting the last zombie for too long, and if he hadn't managed to finish it off, he might have attracted others here. But everything ended well, and Z was able to collect many rewards from the dead, which he dragged into the doorway, blocking the entrance. The guy was in his room 203, preparing for a long-awaited night's rest. He used the Eye of the Explorer, whose protective barrier turned red when a zombie or another person approached, warning of danger, with the help of which it was possible to accurately determine their location. Having installed the eye, Z was able to breathe a sigh of relief, after which he immediately went to the shower and washed off the dirt of today's battles. And the boxes with the awards were lying on the table at that time, waiting for their time. Among them were 2 more Explorer's Eyes, a Twilight Ring, 1 liter of mineral water, and Peking Duck. In his past life, Z had to spend a lot of money to buy all this, but now he got it so easily. The bronze-level Twilight Ring was great for concealment at night, adding 1 point to speed and reducing the sense of presence by 30% at night. The guy put this decoration with a blue stone on the index finger of his right hand. Then his gaze fell on something more important. It was a skill book lying next to me on the table. The system congratulated the player on receiving this item, explaining that he could use an unlimited number of skills from this book. The blonde believed that it couldn't be otherwise, since the explosion coefficient of this object was also unlimited. Normal players from level 10 to level 80 could only obtain special skills 3 times, and Z had seen some unfortunate people who weren't even suited to their skills. Many players in the 60s and 70s only had a skill acquired from their main profession, and the person who managed to obtain the most skills was nicknamed the Skill God, having 25 types of them. Previously, Z had mastered 10 types of skills, which was already superior to 99% of players. Opening the book, the blonde prayed to all sorts of gods that he would get the best skill with which the guy could successfully start this life. Zai was surprised to see that he had been hit with a spin attack. 120% damage was achieved when throwing the weapon, and after reaching the farthest distance or the enemy's body, the weapon returned. The flight distance of the weapon to the target and back was the same, and if it touched the enemy during the return flight, the percentage of damage was 80%. But if it encountered an obstacle, it did not return back. It was a rare skill that allowed the weapon to be returned back and increased the enemy's hit percentage. But the skill's cooldown was quite long, so the guy should increase his energy level to speed up the reload. The blonde man was looking at the book when the system asked if he wanted to learn the skill Spin Attack. The guy agreed without delay, clicking on the pop-up window, after which he immediately decided to try out the new skill. However, his stomach began to growl furiously, demanding food. It was then that Z realized that he should have eaten first. Opening the bag, the blonde took out all the food that was there. As he began his meal, he enjoyed the taste of the dishes, which were just like those in 5-star restaurants. After dinner, the guy began to clear the table. Zai collected all the trash and threw it into the trash can, after which the guy went to the window, looking at the city at night. Since he wanted revenge, he understood that he could no longer follow the game's plot as in his past life, so as not to step on the same rake. Using the system, the blonde took out paper and a pen. On the piece of paper, he wrote 2 words, warrior and magician. Then he began to write down his knowledge about them. When a warrior leveled up, his strength and body quality increased by 1 point, and 2 points were added to any desired characteristics. When choosing the path of defense, the body quality increased. On the path of a warrior, it was necessary to increase strength. For a hired killer, it was worth increasing speed. When choosing a shooter, it was necessary to increase the probability of hitting the target, and warrior specialists could notice changes in the energy of speed. But the most important thing was to go in accordance with their real strength. When a mage leveled up, he would gain 1 point to energy and speed and 2 points to his optional stats. Most players would mainly increase energy, and if they needed to increase their body quality or strength, they could become a warrior mage. Only 1% of players belong to the secret specialty, and the probability of activating a top-class secret specialty was very low. The blonde believed that if he could do it in his past life, then everything should work out in this one too. Unlike normal specialties, only 1% had a secret specialty, and there were even fewer players who had obtained a top-class secret specialty. After reaching level 10, a player could activate experience in the system and choose a suitable scenario for themselves. And although the tasks for a secret specialty were extremely dangerous, the reward was also great. Ghost was the highest level of the assassin specialty and increased speed to the maximum, and also gave a huge percentage of enemy damage before changing the specialty. When increasing the level, speed, and strength increased by 2 points, and any characteristics were increased by 3 points of choice. If Z hadn't activated this specialty in his previous life, he wouldn't have been able to hide from the Lee family for 10 years. And besides, everyone who received higher specialties would become gods of war or gods of magic in the future. As he continued to take notes on paper, the boy began to think about how he could best distribute points between the characteristics. In the end, he added 3 points to strength and 2 points to speed. The boy then tried to remember where he met the Holy Knight. He wanted to find a diamond-level sword, but he completely forgot where the item was. The Lee family's impregnable estate was illuminated by the morning rays. The blue-haired guy angrily broke and threw all the objects around him. He shouted that he couldn't calm down because his plan had gone awry because of Yao Jinhan. The guy was unhappy that the girl was still not there, and because of her, he was unable to finish collecting the material, and the video was not sent to Lin Ziluo on time. Hobbo was even more angered by the game that had begun, and the young master's personal butler asked him to be quiet, because many of his guards were already mortally wounded, and if they were attacked by zombies again, it was unlikely that they would be able to withstand it. Then, smiling maliciously, the boy asked the man if he killed Lin, would he meet his father? At that moment, the good in the butler's head was asking whether the master had deliberately raised the young man in this way. And the evil answered that he could not be mistaken, because if the Lee family had only one capable heir, then this should help avoid civil strife. However, the man understood that with such a character, it would not be easy for the young master after the end of the world. Turning to Zhao, the boy said that he would not calm down, and asked whether his father had told the butler a couple of days ago that a group of hired hunters was supposed to come to the young man. He wanted to know if the time had come when they could be sent to those two. Hobbo wanted to find Yao, alive or dead, and also to drive Z to a nervous breakdown. Bo said that these mercenaries had been specially trained for the young master since childhood and were sure to be able to complete his mission. In response to this, the guy only laughed madly. At this moment, while still in the hotel room, Z sneezed. This made the blonde think that someone was remembering him again. Wiping his nose with a paper napkin and picking up his backpack, he jumped out of the window. The guy landed quite quietly among the dead on the street. Z looked around, making sure he hadn't drawn attention to himself. Then the guy pulled his sword from behind his back, and the next moment the weapon was already flying at one of the zombies to instantly deprive him of the rest of his life. Continuing to destroy the walking dead one after another, the blonde moved to the 4th level, and to get the next one, he needed to gain 40 experience points. Once again, G threw the sword, which on its way back ended up in the zombie's neck. Holding the corpse with his foot, the blonde pulled the weapon out of it. Admiring the sword, the guy was happy with how useful the acquired skill turned out to be. However, he would be truly satisfied after raising his energy level, since the recovery time of the attack was too long for him. As he collected the cases of objects, Z decided that he had killed enough for today. This time, the prizes included a clean men's shirt, spicy chicken rice, and a super accurate watch. And in one of the boxes, he found a new tool. It turned out to be a bronze-level equipment enhancement scroll. The blonde noted that he had finally come across something truly useful. The equipment after strengthening also increased in characteristics, and when using the scroll, strengthening was guaranteed, after which its quality depended on the increase or decrease in level. The guy used the enhancement on his weapon, and now the sword added 2 points of strength, had the ability to reduce the enemy's defense by 15%. With consecutive strikes, the strength increased by 10%, and after the battle, it was able to restore damage. Then Z used the trainer, revealing his personal characteristics. On the contrary, a plus sign appeared, which the guy happily clicked on. The blonde was putting items into his backpack when he was congratulated on receiving the Mask of Concealment. It was a bronze-level item that allowed you to hide your nickname, level, and other basic information for 30 minutes, and you could use it twice a day at most. Z scratched his head, looking thoughtfully at the mask, after which he finally applied it to his face. Having successfully activated, the mask began to disappear quickly. The guy lay down on the ground, leaning on his backpack, and decided to rest a little first and then continue later. He thought that if he reached level 5 today, he could go straight into battle without wasting time on quests. Quests were the best way to earn experience points, food, and equipment in Doomsday. The player only needed to find one of the many portals to the quest. There were also separate special quests where you could get a big reward. The blonde eventually decided to go straight to the Lee family's estate. Before setting off, he took a super accurate watch out of his briefcase, and then, with a smile, he put them on his left wrist. Zai was the only person walking along the road strewn with corpses. Holding his sword tightly in his hand, he walked through the empty streets, which were littered with garbage. Approaching the door of one of the houses, the guy looked at the simple lock. Then came a blow that easily cut through the metal. The blonde opened the doors and entered the room, letting in the sunlight behind him. Various things were carelessly lying on the table, and the chairs were quite far from it. Z carefully scanned his surroundings for enemies. Suddenly, disgusting sounds of zombies were heard from one room. The guy cautiously approached the door, getting ready to enter it. But all of a sudden, dead hands tried to grab him. The blonde recoiled and at that very second cut off the zombie's limbs, after which they fell loudly onto the floor. Suddenly, somewhere behind Z, he heard a blow. Turning around, he saw more zombie hands sticking out of the door, and the next moment the living dead man, groaning angrily, destroyed the obstacle. However, his journey was short-lived, because the blonde immediately finished off his enemy. Then Z entered the room from which the dead man had just tried to escape. One photograph on the windowsill caught his attention. On it was the same tanned man who had just been finished off by the blonde. And next to him on either side stood an unremarkable guy and a girl with red round glasses. The blonde froze in place, looking at the people in the photograph from afar. Dissatisfied with what was happening, the guy suddenly began to grind his teeth. And then he left the room, deciding that too many people had turned into zombies to sympathize with everyone. Zai sat down on the sofa behind the table and began to examine the contents of the backpack. There was such an incredible variety of food that the blonde simply chose it at random. And then he began to actively consume the delicious food. Having finished his meal, the guy assumed a reclining position and began to rummage through his phone. Thanks to the map, he knew that he was currently on Pingshan Street. And after lunch, Z was going to head east towards his destination. And along the way, he still needed to kill a few zombies to reach the 5th level. Having rested enough, the blonde stood up and stretched, after which he cleaned up after himself and walked through the rooms. Somewhere behind the door, Z heard the whisper of unfamiliar voices. He crouched nearby, unhappy that he had allowed himself to forget about the rats, thinking only about food. Strangers whispered about whether the blonde man had left the house. 2 of the 3 were the same people Z had seen in the photograph, while the third had a distinctive feature in the form of a bandage on his nose. The latter asked if his comrades had smelled food, concluding that the blonde certainly had a lot of food cards. Meanwhile, Z was climbing out of the house through the window on the other side. Nervously, the girl in red glasses said that taking food by force was not good. Then the indignant guy with the bandage said that they would just threaten with a knife, and the man himself would give them his cards. The blonde was already behind them, behind the bushes, and the conversation between these 3 did not please Z at all. Ji Kaiji decided to think logically and said that since the blonde man broke down their door, it was a burglary. The girl thought about how, as soon as their father became a zombie, she and her brother immediately ran out without taking anything with them. And so they hadn't eaten anything since yesterday, but this guy had food. Since there was no other choice, she agreed to take the food from the blonde. But at that moment, drops of blood splashed on the girl. They belonged to the guy with the bandage, who was struck by Z's sword. The girl fell down and screamed out of fear. The blonde said he wanted to save some energy, but he couldn't let the trio attract zombies to him. After that, Z threw a rotating blade towards her. At first, the sword flew past the girl, cutting her neck, and then it flew to her fleeing brother, hitting him in the back. Having destroyed all targets, the weapon returned safely to its owner. The guy looked at the dead people without a drop of regret. Then he said that there was no reason for the young man to live without his little sister. The blonde believed that since they wanted to rob him, they got what they deserved. In his opinion, the dead should have thanked Z for stabbing them and allowing them to die quickly. Otherwise, they would have suffered in this game. As he walked away, the boy said that he had done good again, for which the state should reward him. On this day, the family was destroyed in the same way as the frame with her photograph was broken. It was already getting dark, but zombies filled the entire street. Some of them even tried to climb the wall of the red brick house. The girl with the bob urged her lover to look out the window, where, in her opinion, there was a superhero. The guy didn't understand what she was talking about and explained that they locked the door so the zombies couldn't get to them. However, she asked him once again to look down, where the masked man was skillfully fighting the zombies. She tried to see information about him, but was surprised when she couldn't do so. But the girl still wanted to call him as soon as possible in the hope that he would help. But her boyfriend did not support this idea, saying that in this way they would only show their location, and then a bunch of zombies would come to them. The guy also noted that this person, moreover, hid his information, which means he did not want to reveal his identity and would hardly help the couple. In another room, a girl was actively broadcasting live. Looking out the window, she immediately began to call out to the blonde. Smiling, she asked if the guy would save the poor girl. However, Z didn't care about this and didn't pay attention to the lady's cries. What was more important to him now was collecting the rewards he got from killing zombies. Faced with such indifference, the stranger became indignant and began to declare that she had 30,000 subscribers on the internet. Rich men gave her cars every day, and some simpleton in her mask ignored her, which infuriated the girl beyond belief. She decided to show what she was capable of, so she picked up a heavy flower pot. And the next moment, this object flew down straight at the guy standing with his back to the window. However, the blonde immediately sensed something was wrong. He reacted instantly, taking a couple of steps forward, after which, a pot fell from behind with a clang, breaking into many pieces. The blogger started screaming again for the guy to save her, because she was scared because there were several zombies behind the door. Unhappy that some beggar decided to play games with her, the girl said that she would become his wife if he saved her. However, Z was not at all interested in this proposal. He took out from his backpack meat with a zombie virus, which was called Zombie Seducer, because the dead people who were within 100 meters immediately ran to it. And the blonde threw this meat with a surprise into the blogger's room. Enraged, she screamed that she didn't need food, but a safe place. However, the girl became wary and turned back. The door to the room was broken down by a crowd of zombies, which made it impossible to slip past. Since the blogger was weak and didn't know how to fight, she didn't have a chance to resist the dead. All that was left of the girl was a broken phone with drops of blood on the screen. And the live broadcast continued, accompanied by various comments. This was the first lesson of the end of the world. It consisted in the fact that there was no need to ask for help from just anyone. The lonely Z calmly continued on his way, despite the dead crawling behind him. While in the Devil's capital, he reached the sports center. It was in this building that the guy's target was supposed to be located. There were 2 hours left before nightfall, and that should have been enough for the blonde. There was a special silver-level treasure chest hidden in this sports center. According to the game settings, various quests, robot merchants, or treasure chests appeared in significant places of the city. Treasure chests fell straight to the ground and could be opened by anyone. In order for a boss chest to appear, it was necessary to kill the main boss, and the value of such chests was higher, but they were very difficult to get, and silver chests contained silver-level equipment and weapons. When the guy entered the building, the system gave him a new task. 1 is worth 100. Z had to show his true strength by killing 100 zombies of any level in the sports center in 24 hours, and the reward for the task was 1 simple trainer and 1 bronze-level item. The blonde was annoyed, because now most of the zombies had already moved to the 2nd level. The guy just wanted to find a chest and hide, not kill zombies. But now suddenly he came across such a building, and the blonde became interested in what would happen if he refused it. Then the system explained that there was nothing to worry about, because it was created to help the player and to make him enjoy the process. So there was no punishment for refusing tasks or not completing them, but on the contrary, the player received 100 consolation coins. This pleased the blonde, and he accepted the task, realizing that even if he couldn't complete it, he wouldn't lose anything. As far as he remembered, the silver chest was supposed to be hidden in a warehouse on the 3rd floor. Z decided to get there by the safest route. The guy was planning to spend the night on a bed in the first aid station on the 2nd floor, where he was supposed to get by 8 o'clock. And tomorrow he was going to continue his journey and reach the warehouse on the 3rd floor around lunchtime the next day. After finding the chest, the blonde man was about to leave the building by jumping from the outer floor. Having finished making a plan of action, Z found the right door. Then with 1 blow of his sword, he tore off the lock. Opening the door, the blonde found a zombie in the dark room. Hearing the guy, the first dead man was in no hurry to attack him. But Z immediately took decisive action. Taking a few quick steps, he plunged his sword into the enemy's head. Then, moving his hand with the weapon to the side, the guy took out a hammer. He finished off the zombie with a blow to the jaw with an instrument, after which a ball fell out of the hand of the defeated dead man. Zai sympathetically suggested that this man probably didn't think that he would come to play basketball and turn into a zombie. The boy's attention was drawn to the materializing reward. She appeared right between the body and the corpse's hand. Then the blonde pushed the dead man aside with his foot, discovering a key underneath him, which he picked up without hesitation. And as a reward for the kill, he received a flashbang grenade that released a bright light, blinding the surrounding enemies, and the duration of the blinded state depended on the sensitivity of the enemy's eyes and how long he looked at the light. Zai was delighted by this thing, deciding that tomorrow he would go to the Lee estate and try out this bronze group control weapon there, after which he quietly put the item in his backpack. Taking a closer look at the key, the blonde realized that it fit all the doors of the center. And of course, the guy decided to use the key because the less he breaks into the door, the less zombies he will attract. Zai carefully unlocked the door and quietly opened it. And then he carefully looked around the room through the gap that had formed. There was a whole team of zombies in identical tracksuits. Trying not to attract attention to himself, the guy slipped over to the tennis table. Hiding underneath it, the blonde began to count the dead. In total, he was able to count 17 pieces. In terms of characteristics, these zombies were almost at the same level as Zai, and it would take all the strength of an ordinary person to deal with one. But if the guy worked hard, he could handle 17. The door was closed, and if the blonde had made less noise, the zombies outside shouldn't have come. Z only had 4 experience points left until his next level, so he decided to finish off the 2 first and then move on to level 5. after which he could show his martial art to the remaining 15. At that moment, a zombie passed by the guy, and he did it completely in vain. The blonde jumped out from under the table and dealt the dead man a slashing blow to the head from behind, after which the corpse fell with a crash onto the same table where the guy continued to hide. The sound was loud enough to attract the zombies' attention. They turned around to look for the source of the noise. Although there were no more sounds and the dead men's vision was weak, they were ready to attack. The next moment, the corpses rushed onto the tennis table. Still sitting and hiding, Z considered his next steps. He held his sword out in front of him and waited for the zombies to come closer. When the distance was reduced, the blonde man damaged the legs of 2 dead men at once. Then he crawled out from under the table and lay down. Pushing off with his legs, he slipped past the zombie. Once behind the corpses, the boy quickly turned around, assuming a sitting position. The third zombie headed towards Zai, but the blonde immediately dealt with it, receiving 2 points for killing a level 2 zombie. At the same time, the blonde's level increased, giving him 1 choice point for his characteristics. And before the next increase, he now needed to gain 100 experience points. Without wasting any time, Z opened the trainer. A display with characteristics appeared where he increased his speed, after which the guy again disturbed the table by jumping on it. The remaining dead continued to gather around the man who was now taller than them. The zombie behind him was too close to the blonde. Then Z immediately turned around, kicking the corpse. While he was concentrating on fighting the dead, the door suddenly opened. An unknown blonde guy with a red bandage on his head peered out from the crack anxiously. Seeing what was happening, he took a couple of steps back and cursed. This man was indignant because he had been unlucky again. Suddenly, bodies flew through the door, leaving dents behind. Based on the outlines, the guy concluded that they were zombies, and the player in this room probably had good resources. A long time had passed, and this man was still waiting for Z at the door. He wanted to take the blonde's resources, but he could only do so if he was killed. Looking into the room, the man was sure that the player's strength was already running out, and after Z finished dealing with the dead, the stranger was going to help him go to the next world. Smiling slyly, the observer tried to figure out how to lure more zombies to the blonde. Zai continued to fight stubbornly against the dead, who never ended. Another corpse was moving towards him, and the blonde's body was already shaking from the strain. The guy was worried that the screams of these zombies only attracted even more others. Zai looked at the closed door where the dead were breaking down. It was already all cracked, as were the walls adjacent to it. The blonde didn't know how much longer this door could hold, but he tried to remain calm, preparing to kill the last zombies and retreat. While he was looking at the door, another crowd of dead people rushed at him. Once they were close, 3 zombies jumped out, intending to grab Z. However, the guy also jumped up, performing the maneuver. As a result, the corpses fell in the other direction. The blonde, having turned over, was able to land successfully on his feet. 4 zombies responded to this noise and immediately rushed towards the guy. With 1 blow, Z was able to pierce 3 dead men at the same time. Having finished with them, the guy looked at the floor, wiping the sweat from his face. Nearby, as a reward, a stamina potion appeared, after taking which 20% of strength was restored, with 5% of strength being restored every subsequent minute. And the duration of action was 5 minutes, but the freezing time after use was 30 minutes. The guy drank this potion, and it was as if he got a second wind. He threw the sword at the zombie on the other side of the table. The weapon destroyed the dead man, knocking the reward out of him. The blonde had a free minute and began to collect the cases. One of them turned out to be a rather large box, which Z opened with pleasure. Inside was a magical bracelet with spikes, which added 1 point to energy and had an additional function called Spike Attack, which consisted of summoning magical spikes from underground, and the skill recovery time was equal to a day. The guy rejoiced at his luck, amazed that the bracelet also gave him additional skills. He immediately put the item on his left wrist. At this moment, the door finally gave in to the onslaught of zombies and broke, letting the dead into the room. The guy watched as the zombie and the door fell, creating a cloud of dust. Z clenched his fist and said with a satisfied smile that the zombies had arrived just in time. The dead men rose to their feet again and headed towards the blonde. The various corpses were drooling, wanting to taste the guy, but he was not going to give in to them and pushed away from the table. As G flew over the dead, the zombies stretched out their lifeless hands towards him. In flight, he lifted his sleeve, showing the dead his bracelet. And the next moment, thorns burst out of the ground, damaging the corpses and blocking their path. The guy smiled and said that now the fun begins. Once again, spikes burst from the ground, piercing the zombies. The blonde was surprised by such a strong skill. He thought that magicians could only obtain such a skill at level 20. Suddenly, behind Z, he noticed a dead man stretching out his paws towards him. However, the dead man was unable to reach the blonde as he was struck by the thorns. They almost injured the guy too, but he managed to react and jumped back. Having looked around the room, the blonde was amazed by the number of corpses. For killing several zombies, Z received 7 experience points, 11 coins, 2 short-range torpedo tubes, 2 explorer's eyes, and boots of strong wind. And a 24-hour freeze of the skill began, which had quite a lot of power when first used, and it had to be restored using his energy. The guy continued to collect the rest of the variety of awards. He also decided to look at the characteristics of some items. The torpedo tube allowed a short-range shot to be fired at a designated location, and the maximum firing range was 30 meters. The boots of strong wind added 1 point to physical strength and 1 point to speed, lowering the sound of footsteps, and they also had the skill super speed that lasted for 10 seconds, increasing the player's own speed by 20%, with a freezing time of 1 hour. Taking this item, the blonde immediately changed his equipment. The system reported that he had successfully equipped the boots of strong wind, and his basic stats had changed to become close to those of a level 10 specialist. The guy was looking forward to the moment when he would change his specialty, and his characteristics would be twice as high as those of ordinary people. Making disgusting groaning sounds, a crowd of zombies entered the room. However, Z was calm as he loaded the torpedo tube with meat containing the zombie virus, and then he fired somewhere far behind their backs. The dead felt the meat flying above them and watched it closely. When it landed, the dead immediately pounced on the meat. The blonde opened the trainer to use the super speed skill. He turned away from the zombie and began his run. The dead, hypnotized by the meat and fighting for a piece of it, did not react at all to the man running away from them. Having run far enough and found himself near the stairs, Z stopped to catch his breath. The blonde looked at the clock, which showed exactly 7 in the evening. He decided that it was no longer worth killing zombies and was going to find a place to rest and think about what to do in the morning. The guy went up to the second floor and started looking for the first aid station. Having found the right door, he pulled the handle, but it did not budge and did not open. Then Z began to rummage through his pockets in search of the key. Having taken it out, the guy stuck the key into the keyhole and tried to turn it. There was a click that made the blonde nervous. He began to think about how it was 7 o'clock when the world ended and the sports center was not yet closed, and the medical center was usually locked after closing. This meant that the door was locked after the end of the world had already occurred. Having calmed down a little, the blonde took the key out of the keyhole. As Z opened the door, he hoped that whoever was inside would be honest with him. He stood like that for a few seconds, looking around the room. Then the guy finally entered the room. The blonde turned around and closed the door behind him. But at that moment, an unknown person put a knife to his throat, asking who this guy was and where he got the key to the medical center. With a slight smile on his lips, Z noted that the stranger was very vigilant. The next moment, he grabbed the man by the arm, knocking the weapon out of it. And then he explained that the player had messed with the wrong person. Zai kicked the knife and caught it, and a moment later he was already behind the stranger, twisting his arm. The player began to scream in pain, and then the blonde man shoved a crumpled cloth into his mouth. When the stranger calmed down, the guy opened his backpack. From there, Z took out a blanket with white polka dots. He covered all the windows in the room with similar blankets, and then asked to turn on the lights, to which one of the people present said that in that case they would attract zombies, and Z explained that he had already closed all the windows. The girl, of course, did not want to do this, but she still turned on the light in response to the guy's aggressive tone. Now in the illuminated room, one could also see a female doctor, a nurse, and 2 repairmen. The angry player who held the knife to the blonde's throat, after removing the rag from his mouth, said that the man had been attacked by many zombies and still had not died, and admitted that he wanted to wait until he died and take advantage of the opportunity. Zai told him that he had seen this look many times before and asked why he made such crazy eyes. Squatting down in front of him, the blonde advised that when the end of the world comes, one should never look at other people with hatred. Zai explained that they could kill for something like this, and then cut the player's throat with his own knife. Seeing such a picture, the shocked people became agitated. Z saw another knife fall out of the guy's sleeve. The blonde concluded that this guy was well prepared, and if he hadn't killed him, he himself would have died at the hands of others. Feeling awkward, the boy told those around him not to think anything bad about him, because he was a good person. But the people just stood there in amazement and silence, thinking that compared to this guy, they were saints. Then, nervously, Z explained that they themselves saw how this guy tried to provoke him, so the blonde had to do it. And since the player was for common sense, he said that nothing bad would happen to the others if they treated him normally and trusted the guy. Then the doctor took a few steps towards him. She stood unsteadily, adjusting the sleeves of her medical gown. Then she said that they all saw how the guy was actually provoked to such an action. And then she clarified this with those present, who agreed with the girl's words. Then the blonde sighed calmly, satisfied with their answer. He thought that the battle in the ping-pong hall had gone wrong today, but if things had gone a little differently, he would have definitely completed the mission. Z sat down on a chair and, yawning, told the people to remove the corpse from here and wipe away the blood. Afraid of the guy, they obediently agreed to carry out his words. The men wrapped the dead man in a sheet and began to carry him away, while the girls stubbornly washed the blood off the floor. The blonde watched the long-haired nurse, and it seemed to him that he had seen her somewhere before. In the game, her name was Zhang Yexue. She had no title, and her level was 0. Having learned her name, the guy remembered where he knew the girl from. In his past life, after the end of the world, he had already seen her when she had the specialty of a healer. Then, the blonde was wounded and bleeding. He asked her to help, promising to do anything for the girl. Then the doctor replied that this scratch was connected to the soul and could not be cured. Several times the guy was seriously injured, and she treated him. Although the profession of a healer in the world of Doomsday was highly respected and did not pose a threat, this girl's own strength was too weak and she could easily be killed. Everyone had a hard time because of the end of the world, and this girl now looked completely different. And the blonde was surprised that, having been reborn, he met her again on the second day of the game. As he fell asleep, Z thought about how this company had a doctor, a nurse, and a repairman. While the group was cleaning up, the blonde managed to fall asleep. During the night, someone periodically knocked on the door. The frightened people in the room stood in front of her and prepared for battle, armed with whatever they could find. After a few pushes, cracks appeared on the door. This only increased the anxiety in the room, because the people in it did not know how to fight the dead. While everyone was shaking with fear, Z finally woke up from his sleep and looked at the clock, which showed 8:30 in the morning. Then he took out some cards from his backpack, and the next moment, 4 dishes were displayed on the table. The group of people turned to look at the guy eating. They hadn't eaten for a long time, so their stomachs were gurgling and their mouths were filled with actively secreted saliva. The doctor looked at this and envied the blonde man who could afford such a feast. She then asked where he got all this food, hoping that they could get food for themselves too. Z smiled, pleased that his plan had worked. He said that he would help them if they did not refuse his request. The nurse became nervous, expecting something terrible from the blonde. But the doctor was ready to do anything just to survive, so she asked the guy to continue talking. However, she also assumed that the blonde might need something obscene. But he took out a piece of paper and said that all the medications he needed were written on it, and she and the nurse were supposed to get them and bring them to him. Zhang was a little surprised and even asked if Z really wanted them to help him find medicine. The guy confirmed this, not understanding what was wrong, and the doctor considered him too strange. Then she said that everything was fine and agreed to help the blonde. Zai gave the repairman a list of items he needed and asked them to make them that night, saying that he would leave at 6 o'clock the next morning, so they would get as much food as they could make, which the men also agreed to. The blonde took out some cards and explained that they could use these items. Then he went into another room, saying that he would go to sleep. This place was too close to the door, where zombies were constantly wandering around and preventing him from sleeping. He sat down on the bed and, for safety reasons, activated the researcher's eye around him. Digging through his backpack, he admired the considerable number of items in it. Looking through his information, he found out that he had 22 experience points left until the next level, and to complete the task he needed to kill 55 more zombies. Yawning, Z thought that he still had time to commit so many murders, because after waking up he should have another 6 hours left. The guy finally lay down on the bed and fell asleep. Finally, morning came, and Z returned to the room where everyone else was. The repairmen and medical workers had not slept all night to complete the blonde man's tasks, so they looked very tired and sick. Seeing many of the necessary items, Z said that they had done a good job. Zhong then woke up the dozing nurse, who became somewhat alarmed when the doctor touched her. The boy informed the group that they would not have to fight and gave them 1 card each, considering it a reasonable price, as it should be enough to last them through the day. People who had been starving for a long time were overjoyed at such a reward. Zhang was even surprised that the blonde kept his word, because she thought that he would simply kill them and take all the things that the group found and made. And now, the doctor felt joy also because Tsu turned out to be not as cruel as she considered him. Taking back his items, the blonde said that they had simply made a good deal. He was about to just leave calmly, but he froze in confusion when Zhang asked how to use the cards. The guy forgot that this game didn't even have an introductory tutorial, and in his past life, he himself had learned to open his own warehouse for several days. Z decided to do the girl a favor and demonstrate how the cards work. The blonde took one of them and poked his finger at it. In an instant, delicious food materialized on the table. The pleased guy sat on a chair and listened to the doctor's gratitude. Then the nurse, doctor, and repairman took the cards the blonde man gave them and activated them as he showed. Several dishes appeared on the table, and people sat down at it, began to eat, and the nurse even cried with happiness. Watching the group and drinking cola, Z thought that it was worth warning Jong, because in her past life she had helped the guy out many times, and if he could establish a relationship with her now, then it would be much easier to complete the game. The blonde man told the people that they had to leave the center at about 12 o'clock. After that, he walked over to the switch and made the light dim. Z went to each window and took down the curtains, thinking that by the specified time he had to manage to destroy all the zombies in this building. Having collected the much-needed fabric and put it in his warehouse, he headed towards the exit. But before he left, he said the group had not wasted any time. A Jong, worried about the guy, hesitantly said that it was dangerous outside because zombies were wandering everywhere. To which Z replied, "You better worry about yourself." He quietly opened the door and walked out, and the girl just watched the guy go. A crowd of dead people was waiting for him in the corridor, and they did not react in any way to the appearance of a man. The blonde didn't hesitate and immediately rushed into battle. With one simple blow to the neck, he killed the zombie, receiving a fishing rod as a reward. To avoid attracting the attention of other zombies, he held the dead man and carefully placed him on the floor. In this way, he destroyed one corpse after another. Having finished with them, Z walked on in a relaxed manner, not at all tired from cutting up the dead. Walking through the corridors of the center, he suddenly heard a zombie in the men's room. Holding his sword at the ready, he flew into the room, and then, shocked, he cursed when he saw the dead man without pants. The corpse itself was surprised by this outcome. There was a pause during which Z and the bare-ass zombie looked at each other. She was interrupted by a dead man who suddenly decided to attack the man. He stretched out his cold little hands and rushed forward. However, the lowered pants stopped the dead man, causing him to fall to the floor. The satisfied man towered over the zombie, feeling superior. Z suggested that they fight as usual, since it was too easy to defeat a dead man whose pants were in the way. And then the guy, not giving the corpse a chance, pierced it with his sword. The blonde crouched down next to the zombie and lifted it up, examining it. He walked around the room and looked at the sink where the zombie's fallen eye lay. As he left, Z thought that there were very few people who survived in this center, and their characteristics were poor, while the zombies, after being converted, had their characteristics increased. So for ordinary players, it was a real nightmare. Suddenly, suspicious sounds were heard in the women's restroom. They caught the guy's attention, causing him to move closer to the door. He was nervous, trying to convince himself that there could hardly be living people in this room. The blonde was embarrassed by the fact that he would have to enter the women's restroom for the sake of the task. Zhe gathered his strength and, closing his eyes, opened the door. Overcoming his anxiety, he walked into the room and opened his eyes. Looking around, the blonde saw only closed booths and no signs of living people. However, there were definitely two zombies in one of the booths. The guy walked up to the right door and destroyed it with his sword. And then he saw another dead man pressing himself against the zombie girl from behind. Zai was shocked at how this game was becoming more and more interesting. The disgruntled corpses began to growl at the guy who interrupted them for fun. And the next moment they tried to attack the blonde at the same time, but he dodged their hands. Then the couple of dead men decided to leave the booth, but there was a tin can in front of them. Stepping on it, the zombie girl lost her balance and began to fall on her partner. But he too was unable to catch his girlfriend, causing them to fall together onto Z's outstretched blade. Such a stupid situation raised many questions in the blonde, who looked at the dead people who hung on his sword like shish kebab. He put his hand in his pocket to get his phone, after which he began actively photographing corpses, concluding that zombies looked like ordinary people, and nothing changed except their brains. While these, in complete chaos, did not forget to indulge in human passions. The guy looked at the dead men more closely and remembered that he had already seen them. It was a zombie couple that was first seen at the sports complex. They were inseparable and understood each other without words, and their strength was so high that together they could confront the god of war or the zombie king. Z never thought that on the third day of his new life, he would get rid of such a famous couple. For killing them, the blonde received a fusion stone as a reward. It was a one-time use item that allowed two bronze-level items of the same type to be fused together, resulting in a new item with a higher silver level. The guy chuckled contentedly as he took his reward. Having cleared the room and received the reward, the blonde was already about to leave. But suddenly, he decided to look back. Z's attention was drawn to the blue glow in the middle booth. Keeping his sword at the ready, the boy carefully approached the door. Behind it was a bronze-level chest levitating above the magic circle, which made the blonde incredibly happy. For such a find, the guy received an additional 10 points, and to open the chest he had to spend 30 seconds. Zai waited the required amount of time without any problems. Then a card appeared in front of him with an ordinary-looking green apple. Taking it in his hands, the blonde hoped that this fruit added strength or speed. As it turned out, the chest contained a bronze stat fruit, or immortal fruit, which was a rare item that could permanently increase basic stats. The information about the increase in characteristics raised the guy's spirits. Without thinking twice, Z began to wash the apple in the sink, after which he immediately took a small bite of the fruit. He chewed the pulp thoroughly, trying to better taste the apple, and the taste that the blonde felt was incredible. This fruit was the best he had ever tasted. Opening the stat board, Z discovered that they had indeed increased by 2 points. In addition to this apple, the guy also received a regular large carpet. Whistling a certain melody, the blonde dreamed of quickly killing the last zombies in this sports center full of surprises. Coming out onto a more open area, Z encountered a huge number of dead people. Right in front of him, he laid out that same large carpet. The zombie immediately rushed at the blonde, stepping on the soft surface. Azai was confident that he would not disturb the dead in other places like this. The blonde began to quickly cut down zombies, gaining experience points. So the guy was able to move to the 6th level and get 1 point to the characteristics of his choice. And to move to the next one, he needed to gain 200 experience points. In addition to the new level, Z received several resource cards and a bronze-level super flashbang grenade. Using the trainer, the guy added 1 point to his strength and learned that he still had 38 more dead people to kill to complete the task. Thanks to one of the killed zombies, the blonde received bronze-level lion wristbands. They had the strength of a lion, which could make others tremble in fear. And this equipment also added 1 point to strength and body quality, increased attack power by 10%, and had a frightening effect that would reduce the enemy's coordination. And if they used a skill, the skill would be blocked. Z opened the equipment board, and the system announced how to put it on correctly, and also explained that the player could only activate the effect of one item. Each equipment had different properties, and the player could put on these items depending on the needs. The guy put on the wristbands and his strength increased by 2 points. Having dealt with the zombies, the blonde headed to the 3rd floor. He sipped a drink from a plastic cup through a straw as he opened the door. Z looked around the room and didn't like the picture he saw. There were 6 bloody corpses lying in the corridor. The guy knew that ordinary zombies didn't have such strength, and the most they could do was bite a person and turn him into one of themselves. True, if they were in a bad mood, they could eat the brain, but only 2 could do this, and the first of them was the zombie boss. He was on a higher level than ordinary dead people, and therefore had more strength, loved to feed on people, and if there were none nearby, he could eat his own kind to get his fill. And second on this short list were zombie animals. Stronger animals turned into zombies more easily, while weaker animals, such as mosquitoes, turned into living dead extremely rarely. Zombie animals had a particular weakness for people and loved to eat their brains, but they also did not miss the dead. After examining one of the corpses, the blonde suddenly became nervous. There were many scratches on the dead body, which suggested that a zombie cat had been there. The blonde hated them because they had high sensitivity and excellent hearing, so this creature knew for sure that Z was here. The guy wanted to see if this cat wanted to attack from behind or directly. He listened, trying to determine the location of his enemy so he could strike first. Zai felt that the cat must have appeared from somewhere behind. And indeed, a zombie animal quietly crept up from behind. The cat tried to attack, but the blonde managed to dodge. And the next moment, he threw his sword at the creature. A zombie cat with sharp claws whose body would turn into a ghost state when attacking was a boss, as it had an additional property in its name. This boss had excellent abilities and surpassed Z in speed and strength, and also had the ability to terrify people with just a glance, causing the enemy's main stats to decrease by 20%, affecting their combat strength. Because of the animal's talent, the speed of wound healing decreased, and the bleeding time, on the contrary, increased. So if the cat had injured the guy's hand, it would have taken a long time to recover. Considering these facts, the blonde was going to kill the cat using his rich combat experience. He smiled slyly, looking straight into the eyes of the beast which was hissing at him. At this moment, Z received a task called Revenge on the Zombie Cats. Cats with special talents were frequent guests on the 3rd floor of the sports center, as people who loved to feed the furry creatures came there every day. However, after the onset of Judgment Day, Animals infected with the zombie virus immediately began to kill people, and their sharp claws dug into the skin of the victim, who died in agony. For killing the beast, the reward was 100 reputation points, 200 coins, 100 experience points, and 1 bronze item. 8 hours were given to complete the task, and for failing it or refusing it, there was a penalty in the form of a decrease to the first level and a decrease in all characteristics by 1 point. The trainer system stated that it would optimize related questions related to the task. After a few moments, the loading bar finally reached 100%, and then windows appeared, notifying that the time for completing the task had increased to 24 hours, and there was no penalty for failure to complete it. And at that moment, it dawned on the blonde that he could complete the tasks an infinite number of times. In his past life, all the tasks he completed were of a high level of difficulty, and it didn't matter whether Z lost or refused, the game severely penalized him. Only 1% of players found the quests easy, but when they encountered a bronze-tier boss, only a few were able to win, and the reward for completing it was 50 coins, although the blonde thought that it would be better if they didn't exist at all. Now, this task of killing a cat brought a big reward, and also did not carry a penalty for failure to complete it. Without a moment's hesitation, the guy accepted the assignment. Z stood calmly in front of the animal, which did not even try to attack. The cat sat peacefully and licked its fur. The guy knew that if he fell for the boss's provocation, he could lose, so he decided to wait for the zombie to attack first. The cat was surprised when Z simply sat down nearby. He took out his phone and started reading the manhwa. At some point, the blonde laughed casually at the contents. His indifference angered the cat, who was unable to deceive Z. She took a step and pushed off the floor. The next moment, the dead beast was already flying towards the blonde, releasing its claws. During the flight, the creature wished death on the man. It tried to scratch Z, but the guy managed to dodge. He held one of his cards behind his back. The guy used it, and a sword immediately appeared in his hand. The cat bared its teeth and, turning to Z, clicked its claws on the floor. The animal then jumped, making a loud meow. The beast failed to grab the blonde man with its paws. He raised his sword, intending to attack the cat standing with its back to him, but it did not escape her attention. The creature grinned slyly, guessing what the enemy would do next. The guy swung his sword and the cat dodged, saying, "You treacherous man, didn't you expect me to know everything in advance?" However, the blonde was not as simple as she thought. He thrust his sword forward and struck again. The animal, not expecting such an attack, became nervous. The beast failed to escape injury, causing him to say that Z should not expect mercy from him. However, the guy replied that now she was left without her claws, which meant it would be difficult for her to attack. The creature was angry, because the blonde's caustic words were true. The animal meowed loudly and used its cat's eye ability. Under the terrifying gaze of the creature, everything around was transformed. Zai realized that this was how the cat created hallucinations. The light in the room seemed to change to red, and the beast's head became huge, and hands reached out from its eyes towards the blonde. Then the guy explained that he had been playing this game for 10 years, and that this method would not scare him. Hearing this, the poor cat meowed in confusion. The illusion created by the zombie was scattered across the room in small pieces, and the animal itself was subjected to another blow. Because of this, the cat plopped down on the floor away from the guy and growled indignantly. She did not intend to continue the fight with such a dangerous opponent, so she tried to escape. However, Z was not going to let his target go so easily, so he launched a spinning sword at the retreating cat. The weapon quickly passed across the unfortunate zombie's neck, immobilizing him. The system notified that the guy had completed the task and received his reward, with the help of which he was able to move to the 7th level, having acquired 1 point of characteristics of his choice, and for the fact that he was the first to kill a boss of this level, he was given a new title, Bronze Fighter. A certain green-haired guy was indignant, wondering who this Yazi was that information about him had been published again, and one red-haired girl began to admire the owner of the new title, waiting for him to come and take her as his wife. Another man, who didn't give a damn about these announcements, believed that Z was simply chasing fame. At this moment, the head of the Lee family was sitting in a chair and sipping wine. He was sure that the bronze fighter was definitely from their dragon state. He also understood that if such a strong player wanted to join them, their power would have to increase many times over. Z looked at the notification that the announcement of his receiving the title had been published with satisfaction. He assumed that this time he would create a sensation that would force him to hide his beautiful face from his fans. The blonde used one of his cards and a chair appeared in front of him, which he immediately sat down on to rest a little. All of this cat's stats were higher than Z's, And although he had to spend a lot of energy and resources to defeat it, killing a bronze-tier boss was still a great bonus. The guy wondered what would happen to him the next time he met a boss stronger than a cat. But at that moment, a notification appeared in front of him that for receiving the title of Bronze Fighter, he received 1,000 reputation points, 1,000 coins, 3 experience points to the characteristics of his choice, as well as 1 square meter to the storage. Seeing this, the guy opened the game panel. Information about the considerable reward that the blonde man had received appeared before him, and in addition to this, he decided to use a potion to reserve strength. The new title added 2 points to all stats and reduced the power of bosses or simple creatures below the bronze level by 5%. With great joy, Z exchanged his first drop of blood for Bronze Fighter, which would take effect within an hour. The blonde was sure that with such characteristics, even if this cat came to life, he could easily deal with it. And now he was wondering what his characteristics would be after changing his specialty. After resting for half an hour, the guy could finally continue with another task. A box suddenly appeared above the defeated boss, forcing Z to come closer. Inside was a forge of zombie cats, with the help of which it was possible to summon the corresponding animal and control it in battle for half an hour, while the cat could take over 60% of the player's characteristics, and the experience of killing and coins of the beast passed to the owner even after the death of the cat. The freezing time was 2 days. Zai was incredibly happy that he now had an eternal assistant. In addition, the fur, meat, and claws could be turned into gloves, food, or a weapon, so the cat was a real treasure from the ears to the tip of the tail. Zai placed the beast, for whom he was a real devil, in storage. He then calmly continued his way through the corridors of the sports center. The boy remembered that the silver chest was supposed to be in the warehouse. Having found the right place, the blonde opened the door without any problems. There were several skulls and many eyes in the room. Z noted that these cats had unusual taste. Any person would be overcome with fear from such a picture, but such a stacking of eyeballs was fully justified by the end of the world. The guy was sure that he could find something valuable in the warehouse and began to look through the boxes. There he noticed a treadmill with a small dumbbell tied to it. The blonde imagined how the cat played with this rather unusual teaser. Everything else in the room was trash, but Z still didn't lose hope. The guy was going to finish the job by finding something worthwhile, and all that was left for him to do was to look at what was hidden under the white sheet. The blonde removed the cloth and saw a silver chest in front of him. Zai was even surprised at how easy it actually was to find him. For this find, he received 20 reputation points. To open the chest, it was necessary to spend 60 seconds, which the guy just had in reserve. Upon opening the chest, the blonde received an additional reward in the form of an expansion of the square meters of storage, as well as 360 coins, 50 experience points, a winged cape, and a skill book. Also inside were explosive swords that allowed 2 attacks to be carried out simultaneously, each of which was equal to 70% of the power of the characteristics. And it was also possible to cause an explosion with the same power. The difficulty level of such an ability was quite high, and a beginner would not be able to master 2 attacks at the same time. But the blonde was confident that his abilities should be enough to master this skill. The system processed the skill and asked whether Z wanted to learn it, and then she congratulated him on his successful mastery of the explosive swords. Now the guy had 2 whole skills in his repertoire. He took a winged cape made from the feathers of rare birds, which covered his back, and also had special magic, giving him the ability to fly for a short time and increasing his body quality and speed by 2 points. An additional feature was the ability to freeze time for a short period in the event of a jump or fall, with a recovery time of 20 minutes. The blonde was shocked by such incredible equipment and immediately used it, increasing his basic characteristics. Zai was surprised that he had become so rich by defeating just 1 cat. Tonight, he wanted to deal with Lee Hobbo, but now that goal seemed too small for him. Now the guy wanted to deal with his enemy's entire family at once. In this sports center, the blonde had only 1 last task left to complete. 1 is worth 100. Once again, Z found a crowd of zombies who had once played tennis. Leaning against the door, the guy knocked on the wood. The zombies immediately all turned towards the source of the sound. Additionally, the blonde stamped his feet, calling the dead to action. However, this time he was going to attack first. So Z began his run towards the corpses, and hungry zombies rushed towards him. Finding himself too close to the dead, the boy jumped, and then the running corpses lost their target. At that moment, the blonde was flying above them, raising his sword above his head. He then pierced the head of one of the zombies. The defeated enemy had no choice but to collapse to the floor. While he was falling, Z continued his flight. The guy turned around in the air and looked at the pathetic zombies. He targeted one of them and said that he was just about to try a spin attack, and that this dead man was the best fit. Showing off his appearance, the blonde aimed his weapon at his opponent. Then he put his hand forward and pulled the sword back. The next moment, Z launched a flying strike without releasing his weapon. The boy was amazed by the amazing skill that created a wave of air. This allowed the dead to be destroyed from a distance without the risk of being bitten from the other side. However, killing the zombies in this manner caused an explosion. The blonde, unprepared for such an outcome, covered himself with a cape. He screamed as the shockwave hit him too. Z didn't want to fly into the wall, so he tried to stop his uncontrolled flight. He raised his sword and thrust it into the floor, barely keeping himself in place. The attacked corpse had stats that were at least 30% higher than the others, but he was unable to withstand the blow. The effect of the explosive sword was much better compared to the rotating one, although the speed of these attacks was the same. Everything around calmed down and the guy's trials were over. Now the blonde was ready to get down to business in earnest. He continued to diligently cut down zombies and was able to complete the task, for which he received the opportunity to collect a reward in the form of one simple trainer and one bronze-level item. The guy pulled the sword out of the last dead man and turned around. He was even surprised to realize that everything ended so quickly. Since the zombies were no longer advancing, the blonde began to collect the cards. However, all of them were only with material resources, which made Z somewhat upset. The guy decided not to worry about his luck suddenly evaporating and decided to rest a bit before looking for something else. He was already sitting on the couch and thinking about what item to take as a reward for completing the task. The blonde considered taking the piece of equipment first, hoping that he would get a better trainer if he waited a little longer. Having decided on the subject, Z clicked on the pop-up window. The system then congratulated him on receiving the blood-absorbing ring. It was able to take away the enemy's strength during combat and added 1 point to the strength and quality of the body. And thanks to it, 5% of the enemy's damage was transmitted through the weapon and transformed into strength. Zai was even glad that he got an item with such an excellent ability. He took advantage of the system and put on the given equipment. The guy thought that since he got such a good thing, the trainer could have been worse. Then the system explained to him that all simple programs had a practical effect and were useful to the owner. In that case, the blonde nevertheless decided to immediately take the second coach. Zai was eagerly awaiting what would happen to him. The blonde got the first-level automatic collection. It allowed collecting items from killed zombies within a half-meter radius, which were then placed in storage. But if the storage was full, then collecting could not continue. That is, now the guy could not only get a 100% explosion coefficient from killing zombies, all dropped cards could automatically collect items. Z jumped off the sofa with unspeakable joy. Initially, he was afraid that there would be many problems due to the high explosion coefficient, but now they have been solved. The blonde checked with the system to see if this first-level trainer really belonged to a simple program. Then, the system explained that with the receipt of another automatic collection trainer, his level increased. And along with this, the radius of collection of items expanded and other functions could also appear. And tasks from the trainer appeared in accordance with the situation and the player's condition, while he himself could not set the place and circumstances. Z became curious about what functions the other trainers had and what he would get next time. There were still a lot of undead around that hadn't been looted, so this was a great opportunity to test out the new ability. With the help of automatic collection, the guy got barbecue seasoning, a power bank with 50% charge, an explorer's eye, and a tasty crab. Then came the notification that the system had detected that the quality of item collection was poor, so it was optimized, and now the blonde would receive messages about collecting equipment and items, and the cards would be automatically moved to the storage. Next, the blonde opened the warehouse to check how the collected items were arranged, and also to get rid of unnecessary things. One of the pleasant bonuses was the fact that the automatic collection divided everything into categories: fighting the cat, then the zombie, and then getting the trainer. Z completely forgot about time. The guy looked at his watch and was amazed at how quickly it had flown by. Because the blonde spent too much time clearing the building, he didn't have time to eat dinner, because it was already time for him to go to the Lee estate. As planned, he ran to the window from which he jumped. The Lee family's mansion seemed to be impregnable and could avoid any trouble. Inside, in one of the rooms, a young gentleman was having fun with young ladies. Lying on the lap of one of them, he laughed cheerfully. But at one point, the smile slid off his face. Hobbo glanced at his watch, which showed that it was already noon. The young man sat down and his face darkened, which made the girls nervous. The guy's displeasure was so great that he slapped one of his guests. Hobbo was outraged that his people had not returned yet, and thought that it was a waste of time to feed them if they could not find a couple of people for so long. The butler explained that the mercenaries had left for the university at 7 in the morning, but there were too many zombies there, which is why the search was delayed. But this fact only made the guy even more angry. Now he was outraged that he didn't get experience points for killing the dead. Hobbo hoped that the promotion in the game would strengthen his body, so he dealt the final blow to the zombies that his guards had previously dealt with. But he received too little experience for this. The butler and the young master were suddenly attracted by the sound of the door opening. The silhouette of a well-known man stood in the doorway. It was Uncle Wrong, whom Hobbo asked if he had found the orphan boy and girl. Before answering, the man came closer and threw a black bag on the floor. Then he reported that he had found the girl, but the guy had disappeared somewhere. The impatient young man, dissatisfied that the girl dared to hide from him, asked where his uncle found her and demanded that she come to him immediately. But Wrong explained that the girl had been killed, but she was in the bag. The man's words seemed crazy to Hobbo, and he certainly didn't expect to hear them. Uncle said that according to the master's instructions, they found the roommate and then Yao Jingan herself in the university warehouse. To prove his words, Zhang unzipped the bag, which indeed contained the bloody body of the girl he was looking for. My uncle said that she was killed and put into a barrel, inside of which were men's clothes soaked in blood. He also explained that before her death the girl was severely tortured, and the blows were inflicted on painful points. Wrong reported that the killer apparently had a good understanding of acupuncture points and used a special technique to stab the knife into the most painful spots, grinding Yao's muscles into mincemeat. And Hobbo ran to vomit after hearing these words. Smiling, the man said that this man was a master of torture, and even the most brutal killer could not have done it so perfectly. The uncle assumed that the girl was killed out of revenge, and that the killer perhaps wanted to deal with the young master as well. The guy was surprised because Yao was the most beautiful girl in the university, and it was unlikely that she could date such trash. While fixated on the word trash, Hobbo suddenly thought of Lin Ziluo. However, the young man doubted that this guy could have such skills because he was a complete orphan and could not do something like that. Hobbo said that he hadn't managed to send him the video he had prepared for him, so Ziluo couldn't know that Yao was going to frame him. So Wrong asked if the gentleman was talking about Lin Jian's son. The boy confirmed this, and the uncle agreed with Hobbo's thoughts but explained that Ziluo could have helped. And if he was really capable of doing this, he posed a great threat. Moreover, even 100 warriors would not be enough to confront such a person, so the Lee family needed more security. Hobbo was surprised that the man was short of people, because he was one of the top 10 mercenaries in the Dragon State, and moreover, he had an excellent team of assassins. Fearing for his life, the young master demanded that Wrong recruit more people, even from those who had just begun training, and his uncle replied that he would do everything for the sake of the family. He was truly ready to even sacrifice his life to protect his loved ones. Meanwhile, Z continued to destroy zombies on his way to the Lee estate. He even managed to move to the 8th level, although he thought that he would do this no earlier than the 4th day. Since the guy was leveling up so quickly, there was no longer any need for him to fight in quests. Not wanting to stop, the blonde grabbed a chocolate bar for a snack, and thanks to his haste, Z quickly found himself at the gates of the estate of those whom he hated with all his soul. He asked himself whether Hobbo was ready to pay for all the pain he had caused the guy in his past life. By the time the blonde arrived, the mansion was completely filled with guards. They patrolled the area in groups of 6, and all these people couldn't notice the guy who was hiding in the tree. Zai waited for the moment when the guards were far enough away that he could jump down without revealing himself. When there was no one else around, the blonde finally descended to the ground, finding himself among the bushes. Between them, the guy was trying to find something, and then he pressed a hidden button that was barely visible in the grass. While the secret passage was opening, Z was pleased with his good memory. The blonde pressed the button again, setting the stroke to its original position. The guy decided to leave Hobbo a way to retreat, and then catch him when the enemy hoped to escape. And this was a famous move by one of the great warriors of the Dragon State. Z noted that Hobbo had prepared well this time, and perhaps he could even defeat the blonde. After walking a bit through enemy territory, the guy hid around the corner from the guards coming out, looking at their backs, where a white eagle was trapped in a red circle. The boy realized that they were part of the mercenary squad that had been Z's worst enemy in his past life, and it was them that Hobbo trusted the most. Now the blonde was well acquainted with these people. However, he was never able to find out the plans of the Lee family. The guy chose a suitable way to enter the house and was already thinking about all the nuances. But when the guards began to greet Rongjan, he became nervous. Z tried to look out to make sure that there really was a person nearby that he knew. Rong was one of the gods of war and a hired killer of the Dragon State. Before the end of the world, he worked as a military man, was the leader of the mercenary army during the times of military turmoil, was directly subordinate to the Lee family, was strong in various types of hand-to-hand combat, army command, and also pursuit of the target. In the past life, after the game started, the man began to chase the blonde man on Hobbo's orders. After several attempts to catch Zai failed, he decided to kill the guy. This man had driven the blonde into a dead end several times, so it could be said that he was Z's strongest enemy. However, the guy was cunning and used his cards wisely. Because of this, he became the greatest disgrace of the military. And since the blonde had eluded wrong several times, the man had lost his reputation as an invincible mercenary. For this reason, whenever these two met, both of their eyes would become bloodshot. Suddenly, Wrong felt someone else's gaze on him. However, Z had good reflexes, so he managed to hide around the corner. Hearing the approaching footsteps, the blonde was sure that this time the former military man would definitely die. If the guy kills him, then it can be considered that he will get rid of the main protector of the Lee family, and then half the job will be done. But it was too early to attack the man now, so Z put on a mask of concealment. Thanks to this action, the guy remained unnoticed when the opponents approached from both sides. One of the guards told Zhang that the young master was looking for him. Watching the men go, the invisible blonde understood that he must not miss his chance. He then successfully left the place where he was hiding. As Rong walked away, he kept glancing sideways at that corner, feeling as if someone had been there, even though they hadn't been discovered. The man didn't want the person who wanted the Lee family dead to leave the mansion alive, so he ordered patrols and protection of the estate to be strengthened. It was getting dark outside and it was approaching midnight. Yawning, Hobbo asked his uncle if he could go to bed, since it was already quite late, and the zombies were in an active stage, so it was unlikely that anyone would come to them. But the man said that it was better to wait a little longer, since his instinct told him that they were being followed. The guy threw his watch on the floor and cursed, unhappy that he had to sit up all night without sleep because of some scum of society. Then Bo suggested to the young master that he come up with some entertainment since he was bored. The young man slammed his fist into his palm and declared that he really wanted to have some fun. Hobbo then asked about the corpse that was captured today, and Rong replied that he wanted to conduct tests on the zombies to invent a better weapon against corpses for the master. Then the guy said that there were already enough dead people, so he asked to give this one for the young man's games, but the man was in no hurry to agree, as he was afraid that this zombie could harm Hobbo, although using a dead man to calm the young master down was indeed a good idea. The young man said that he would be fine. Besides, he was not afraid of zombies at all, and there were a lot of guards in the estate. Finally, Rong ordered one of his subordinates to bring in today's dead man. After a while, Hobbo's room was filled with several guards who were holding the enraged corpse with chains. He was tied with ropes. His zombie legs were held in shackles, and his mouth was hidden by a metal mask. Madness played in the young man's eyes, and he ordered that a large cage be brought to him. And in this cage there were several exhausted girls. Their necks were hidden behind thick iron collars. Smiling devilishly, Hobbo picked up the bell and began to shake it vigorously. The girls stood up in alarm and rushed to the iron bars. Then, the young gentleman put down the bell and said that he was bored, as he had been playing with the same girls for several months, and he was getting pretty tired of them. The guy wanted to get new toys, but he also found a use for these girls, deciding that their time had come to pay for feeding and watering them. He stood up and, shuffling his white slippers on the floor, walked closer to the cage. Hobbo then ordered the zombie to be unchained and thrown into the cage. Like a madman, he declared that he wanted to watch the dead man eat them. Some of the guards were surprised by the guy's perverted desire, but still remained silent. Others happily volunteered to carry out the order, as they themselves loved to do such things. The young gentleman gave one of those who volunteered the key to the cage. The guard immediately hurried to open the door with the unfortunate girls. The same guard, holding onto the chain, approached the zombie. Then he removed the mask from the dead man, preventing him from biting anyone. Feeling a grain of freedom, the zombie turned sharply towards the man, showing his grin. Hobbo ordered the other two mercenaries to hold the corpse until its shackles were removed, and then to put it in the cage. At this point, some guy asked Mr. Lee if this was too cruel and suggested that he let the girls go. The man next to him knelt down, made the upstart bow low, and asked the young man not to be angry, explaining that this mercenary was called Wang Dahu, and he was sent to replace the guard who died yesterday. The guy was unhappy with this behavior, and Van continued to ask him to let the girls go. The guard sitting next to Dahu began to apologize again, saying that it was his mistake. Smiling predatorily, Hobbo approached the new guard and, laughing, said that no one had tried to argue with him for a long time. Asking rhetorically if he knew how to fight, The boy ordered the mercenaries to show Van where his place was. Then two guards approached Doc, one of whom twisted his arm. The one who was larger and seemed stronger began to strike the man. However, Wang was able to stop the fist with his free hand. Seeing this, Rong was even a little surprised. Now he too became interested in watching what was happening. Dahu squeezed his enemy's hand tightly, causing it to shake. The mercenaries became worried, realizing that they had lost to this guy in strength. The man whom Wang managed to disgrace wanted to kill the new guard for it. He turned around, asking his comrades to help him teach Daka a lesson. However, first they mocked the mercenary. Realizing that Van was not to be underestimated, the distrustful mercenaries rushed to help their comrade. Now Dahu's hands were held by two men. Feeling his strength again, the insulted mercenary swung his arm to strike. His fist landed right on Van's jaw, and the next moment the doomed guard was spitting blood. Hobbo demanded that the mercenaries not kill him. Since Wang wanted to protect the girls, he had to watch them die with his own eyes. Obeying the master, the mercenaries led Dahu to the cage, holding his head so that he could see everything clearly. One of those present began to untie the dead man. Then the three mercenaries, using long metal sticks, began to push the zombies into the cage. The ugly corpse still found itself inside without incident. He looked at one of his victims and drooled. The dead man began to tear apart the flesh of one of the girls, who did not react to this in any way, completely resigned to her fate. The mercenaries holding Wang watched his reaction with a grin. The disappointed guy shuddered, and tears welled up in his eyes. He tried to break free, tried to shout something, but the men held the guard tightly, covering his mouth. When Dahu calmed down, the mercenaries let the guy go. At that moment, he felt a lot, but at the same time, he was devastated. Hobbo, wanting to see who was stronger, ordered the mercenaries to throw the guard into the cage. Some people cheerfully supported the gentleman, while others understood that, even despite the end of the world, it was not worth neglecting human lives. Two men grabbed Van and dragged him into the cage. He hung in their arms as if he had already died. The zombie continued to torture his victims, tearing off their limbs. Without ceremony, Dahu was thrown onto the floor behind the dead man. Hearing the guy's hard landing, the zombie turned around. The boy began to feel fear, seeing the creature smiling. Clenching his hands into fists, Wang was in no hurry to get up, but the dead man headed towards him. Closing his eyes, Dahu remembered his mother, who said that she would wait for his return and asked him to be careful. Crying, the guard asked for forgiveness from his mother, to whom he could not return to continue caring for her. But suddenly he opened his eyes. Since his mother was waiting for him, Van couldn't give up so easily. He gathered all his strength into a fist, waiting for the dead man to approach. Grinning, the zombie eagerly ran towards the guy, who had taken an attacking pose. A blow followed, causing the dead man's tooth to fall out. Dahu then lunged forward, grabbing the creature's waist. Screaming, he tried to knock the dead man down, dragging him forward. The zombie couldn't resist this force, but suddenly blood started pouring out of Van's mouth. This happened because the dead man thrust his hand into the guard's back. A furious pain spread through the guy's body. This made Dahu's legs buckle, but he couldn't stop. Seeing the delay, Hobbo demanded that the fighters continue fighting. Then Wang, bleeding and coughing up blood, pulled his hand back, clenching it into a fist. He then delivered a blow of incredible force to the dead man's head, defeating him. However, this was the last blow dealt by the fighter for justice. The next moment, Dahu fell on his back next to the defeated zombie. Bleeding and crying, he mentally asked for forgiveness from his mother, whom he had let down. Rong was disappointed by his death. The disgraced mercenary was surprised that the guy was able to kill a dead man with his bare hands, and someone was outraged that he died so quickly. At this time, the zombie virus was quickly spreading throughout Van's body. A few moments later, he was no longer a man, but a zombie. The morning of a new day arrived. Z sat on a tree branch, not wanting to miss the opportunity. The guards who had been patrolling all night were at their most vigilant, and the blonde man had no choice but to choose his victim. Finding himself behind one of the mercenaries, the guy put a knife to his neck. The guard didn't even have time to react when his throat was cut. Zai quickly removed all traces and put on the victim's clothes. While moving around the estate, the blonde ran into one of the mercenaries who mistook the guy for one of his own, and who was wondering what the guard was doing there. Zai explained that he noticed one guy falling asleep, so he wanted to wake him up. And the mercenary, not noticing anything suspicious, was indignant that the commander was having fun with the others in the Great Hall while they were guarding the gate. More mercenaries approached them and continued the conversation, expressing their dissatisfaction with the terrible treatment they received from their superiors. Z himself tried to support this conversation. However, one of the guards asked when the guy had managed to grow so much. Realizing that he had been exposed, the blonde was ready for the next step. The boy believed that people who were unable to keep secrets could not live in this world. While on the mansion's premises, Z killed one mercenary after another. Turning around, he noticed one of the guards trying to escape. However, the blonde caught up with the man without any problems and cut his throat. Only the mercenary managed to fire a signal flare. Then the guy masterfully threw a knife at her. The blade pierced the projectile, preventing it from communicating the danger. Then they fell to the ground together, and Z pulled out his weapon from the rocket. The reason he was so lucky today was because, in his previous life, he had researched all of the Lee family's military supplies. The system announced that all the guards in the outer part of the estate had been destroyed, and now the path of revenge began. And after that, the blonde received a special task, an eye for an eye. To complete it, one had to kill the remaining 269 people in the manor. The reward was one simple trainer and one piece of bronze-level equipment, and there were 12 hours to complete it. Now Z had another reason to kill Hobbo. Having accepted the task, the guy went into a magical barrier of revenge, which meant that if after killing 269 people one got out, the blonde could use the equipment to find the target. Zai wanted to know more about this barrier, and the guy decided to look at its characteristics. It was a high-level tool that placed people in a barrier, and if someone went beyond it, the owner of the barrier could see the location of that person, and the minimum duration was 1 month. In his past life, the blonde encountered this thing when the Dragon State placed a barrier of revenge in the capital of Japan, and those who escaped from it were killed within a few days, so they were able to destroy the whole of Japan. And today, Tsu himself had the opportunity to use this thing and find out how useful it is. The system wished for a successful execution, but something was wrong. Several murder alerts followed, shocking Z, who had not yet had time to do anything. He ran into the house to check what was going on. One mercenary asked another what he was doing, since he was given a girl to have fun with, not kill. And the second apologized for overdoing it and breaking her spine, which is why the men now had no toys. Someone asked if they would play with him, which scared several people present. The situation became so gloomy that even Wrong frowned. Someone kept repeating the same phrase over and over again. Realizing that massive bloodshed was inevitable, Uncle stood up, ready for battle. He had never seen a person capable of creating such an aura of death before, and compared to him, the man was just a little boy. Falling from fear, Hobbo screamed hysterically that they had come to kill him after all. The butler tried to calm the young master, assuring him that Wrong and his army of mercenaries would not allow this to happen. The uncle offered to talk to the ill-wisher, realizing that this man was able to deal with all the guards outside. Although those guys weren't well trained, each of them was worth a dozen soldiers, so the fact that the enemy was able to kill them so easily seemed incredible. The invisible enemy said that, although he was a man, he was now the god of death for his enemies. Wrong waved his hand, calling his subordinates to action. The mercenaries split up and began to look around in an attempt not to miss an unexpected attack. They became alarmed when something fell between them. The projectile activated and the room filled with bright light. The blinded guards, not understanding what was happening, began to scream, and one of them even said that he was dying. Then Z was able to enter the room unhindered. The guards, focused on their own eye pain, didn't even notice. Taking advantage of the moment, the guy launched an attack with spikes. Stone spikes burst from the ground, impaling the men. The blonde struck his other opponents with spinning swords, cutting off their heads. Noticing the enemy's figure behind him, Wrong was horrified. Once again, Z threw a grenade at his haters. It broke when the guy was far enough away. The man tried to get a better look at the blonde, but his back was turned to the soldier. Covering himself from the explosion, Zhang was indignant that he could not see the enemy's face, and his entire team had already fallen. He stood among the many corpses of his subordinates in shock. One of the mercenaries said that the enemy used magical spikes, which killed almost all of the young master's servants and guards, and those rotating swords even killed the crocodile, bear, and wolf. An angry Wrong demanded to know how many people were left, and the mercenary replied that besides him, Hobbo, Zhaobo, and the squad leader, there were still 66 guys left. Among them, 10 were seriously wounded, and several still had not recovered their sight. The nervous youth screamed, asking who the man was who was ruining his plans and spoiling his fun, and also demanded that his uncle take revenge on the enemy and show him his corpse. The angry man then ordered the remaining survivors to find the killer, saying that the enemy could not cope with so many people alone. Wrong asked Bo to take the young master and Skinny to the secret tunnel, while he and the remaining men detained the assassin outside, and the butler agreed to this, but said that he suspected that the enemy had not gone anywhere and was still watching them. Then Wrong walked up to Bo and just put his hand on his shoulder, as if saying goodbye. Then the butler, without further ado, went to carry out the man's order. Zai stood nearby and sipped his cocktail, mentally noting that this servant was unexpectedly smart. As the blonde thought, the commander-in-chief decided to split up and go outside to protect Hobbo, and the guy himself was going to first deal with the remaining mercenaries to make sure that he could leave without problems. He used the system to view information about his opponents. Zai found out that in such a short time, Rong had already managed to obtain 3 pieces of bronze-level equipment. The mercenary began to call the blonde to come out, and the guy considered this a stupid attempt to buy time for Hobbo to escape. However, Z couldn't allow this to happen, so he opened his vault. From there, he took out the horn of a zombie cat and summoned the animal. The guy also took a knife from his warehouse. Then he took aim and threw the gun up. The blade flew over the chandelier, cutting through the mount. Then she fell to the floor where Rong stood, barely managing to jump away. Glass shattered across the room, injuring the mercenaries. However, this was not the only danger that reached the men. The number of guards capable of fighting became fewer and fewer due to the cat, which successfully gnawed their necks. Zai also actively slaughtered his opponents. Soon, most of the mercenaries were lying on the floor in their own blood. The commander-in-chief tried to look up information about the enemy, but was unable to do so because of the concealment mask, which angered him. The man was angry and demanded that the blonde reveal his identity. Zai saw that the mercenaries' technique was weak. Their stats were low, and even their personal qualities left much to be desired, and they would only reach a good level in a few years. Turning to the survivors, the blonde said that he now knew what disappointment was. After that, holding the knife at the ready, he rushed towards Jun. Several guards tried to block his path but were brutally killed. Now all the mercenaries were dead, and the commander-in-chief was left alone in the face of death. The man was so frightened by this situation that he began to tremble, temporarily losing his speech, and then, out of despair, he fell to his knees. Z ordered his cat to track down Hobbo and the others. The beast immediately ran to carry out the order, and the guy, looking at the magical barrier, knew that his target was still in the estate. The blonde put his foot on Jun and tried to get him to talk. Z also added, "Almost all of your people died. Can I still call you Commander?" The boy knew that he had stifled almost all of the man's will to resist by killing all of the mercenaries before his eyes and destroying all of his work. Having come to life a little, Zhang asked the blonde to tell him who he was, admitting that otherwise he would not close his eyes after death. Then, smiling, Z said that it sounded good. Realizing what this meant, the mercenary pressed himself against the wall in horror. One sharp wave of the hand and life left the man's body. Rong fell to the floor and hit the ground, making a soft sound. The blonde stepped on his head and said that he remembered the day when the man insulted him by trampling him into the ground. While mocking the body, he confessed that the mercenary taught him not to talk nonsense in front of someone you were going to kill, because actions were better than talk. The killer found it funny that the commander actually did not close his eyes after his death. With the Lee family's main protector dead, it became much easier to take revenge. Having finished torturing the dead man, Z moved on to his next target. Behind him, he left corridors strewn with corpses. While in the secret room, Hobbo was nervous that assassins would soon come for him. The butler tried to calm the young master down, saying that Rong would deal with these people. Suddenly, someone's body crashed into the wall, leaving a dent. The boy was overcome with horror and was sure that this man had been sent after him by Ziluo. But Bo said that there was nothing to worry about since they had passed through a secret passage. Hobbo then asked how this guy knew about his relationship with Yao and where he found such a strong mercenary. And the butler suggested that it was Lin Jian who might have left an assistant for his son. But the young master objected that this could not be, because when Jian was killed, they destroyed everything that the Lin family had. He admitted that if the leader hadn't ordered them to leave someone alive, then this Zilo wouldn't exist. At that moment, a blonde man was standing behind the door. He overheard the entire conversation and now knew that he had been followed for a long time. And then he only said, "This is how." Hobbo heard a familiar voice and wondered how Ziluo could come here. The blonde himself, sighing, realized that there were many more stories behind his back. The young master said that the boy should have died by his hand many years ago, and Z said that he was interested in knowing who Jian was and why the Lins destroyed the Lee family. Then Hobbo laughed at the fact that the boy didn't even know his own father's name. He explained that Lin Jian was going to report his father just when he was about to get promoted, which would destroy everything their family had worked towards for many years. And that was why the Lin family was reduced to ashes. The young master said that if it weren't for the leader, Z would be dead, and also asked who helped him, because if the guy was alone, the guards would easily deal with him. To which the blonde replied that Hobbo's words were meaningless, since he would destroy the Lee family anyway. The young gentleman said arrogantly that the boy had overestimated himself. The door swung open and a masked man with a zombie cat appeared in front of Hobbo. Then the butler tried to hit the killer, but the blonde dodged. Then the man was attacked by an animal that had crept up from behind. However, Bo successfully fought off this attack, and the cat began to disappear just at the time that Z had expected. The guy grabbed his mask and began to take it off. The butler was surprised when he saw a blonde man behind her, and Hobbo was covered in cold sweat from fear. Bo couldn't believe that such an orphan could enter the Lee estate and kill the commander of the mercenary squad, and Z replied that the old school people would not survive the Judgment Day, because once the first 7 days of the game passed, their well-trained soldiers would not be able to cope with even one zombie on the street. The young gentleman nervously asked how the boy had managed to become so strong. But the blonde did not reveal his secrets, saying only that he could easily deal with them alone. Zai then engaged in a fist fight, trying to hit the butler. However, the man was able to successfully block the attack. He staggered but managed to stay on his feet. The blonde concluded that Bo was quite strong, since even Wrong fell from such a blow. Since it came to this, the butler had to use another method. The man then clenched his hand into a fist, tensing all his muscles. Suddenly the man's clothes tore, revealing his muscular torso. This caused the blonde to arm himself with a sword to gain an advantage. Z tried to hurt the butler, but he dodged it with the words that the guy doesn't understand anything about the morality of wushu, and the blonde replied that he wants to cut off his head and should not ask anyone for permission to do so. Zai then threw his weapon at the enemy using the skill Spinning Swords. The first time the man managed to dodge. However, he had no idea that the blade could return. Therefore, the next time Bo was unable to avoid being injured. The butler had been practicing Chinese boxing for 50 years and could not believe that he would lose so quickly. He said he was not going to stop and wanted to add something else, but his speech was interrupted. The man was interrupted by an explosion intended for him. This was meant to serve as a diversionary tactic, after which Z would attempt to attack the enemy. The blonde delivered a crushing blow from below, saying that he could not leave the matter unfinished, and only after making sure that the enemy was dead could he calm down. The boy thought the butler was a pathetic, backward old man who, despite the end of the world, still thought that wushu would help him. Killing Bo proved that strength alone was not enough in this world, and it was necessary to change one's technique and develop speed. Otherwise, the road was only to death. Looking at Hobbo, Z saw him lying unconscious. Because of this, the boy considered the young master useless. Then the blonde came closer and stabbed him in the leg with a knife. The young man immediately came to his senses and screamed in pain. Z grinned and asked, "Are you awake or were you pretending to be dead?" Then, with particular pleasure, the blonde continued to pierce his enemy's limb with his sword. Hobbo started calling for help and telling the killer that his father would deal with him. In response to this, Z only smiled without saying a word. Then he pierced the leg of the man he hated once again and twisted the sword. Tormented by pain, Hobbo asked to kill him faster, but the blonde only verbally mocked the martyr. The killer opened the vault and took one item from there. It turned out to be a dull, convulsive knife that Z had saved just for his revenge. He then tried to thrust the blade into the enemy's hand, causing him to scream. The blonde apologized for not being able to thrust the weapon inside because it was too dull, and then he raised the weapon over his victim again. While piercing the young master's hand, Z said that this knife reflected his essence. It also reflected his 10-year journey full of risks, and now the killer felt sorry that Hobbo's suffering did not make up even 1% of his. The young master was shocked to hear about 10 years, and then he admitted that he only started thinking of ways to torture him 3 years ago when he found out about everything. A devilish smile adorned Z's gloomy face, saying, "This is for my suffering." He once again thrust the blunt knife into the victim's hand, and the next time the blonde stabbed the young gentleman because he was having fun. Hobbo stuttered and asked him to stop, but the blonde man only continued to smile, once again causing pain to his victim, who was bleeding all possible bodily fluids. Z said that this was for his entire family, for whom it was necessary to avenge, although he had never seen his ancestors. Stopping for a second, the blonde realized that he could no longer find a reason to torment the victim. However, he continued to do it for fun. When the assassin got tired of stabbing Hobbo, he took out the crucible pliers from his storage. Zai extended his hand towards the victim, clicking his pincers, causing the young master, scared beyond belief, to ask what the boy was doing. The killer admitted that he had to thank the young master because it was he who came up with the most cruel methods of torture, sending many people to the next world. However, Hobbo was surprised because he had never done anything like this before. The blonde swung the knife, cutting into the victim's skin and causing her to scream. After this, Z stuck the pliers into Hobbo's mouth and pulled out the tooth. The young gentleman tried to resist somehow, but the killer was much stronger and continued to confidently pull out the teeth. So the blonde guy stripped the guy of the entire bottom row and then asked, "Is that not enough for you?" Z said that in his previous life, Hobbo had learned a huge number of new methods of punishment, and the blonde man had not done even 1% of all the tortures to him. The killer felt sorry that he couldn't use the things the young master had researched on the victim now, because torturing Hobbo was no longer interesting since he was practically dead. Thinking that the victim might be faking, Z stabbed her a few more times as a test, but Hobbo really didn't react to anything anymore. The guy realized that he had overestimated his enemy's acting skills. The blonde had killed the young master's psyche, meaning his body was no longer capable of withstanding any more torture. As he left, Z threw a spinning sword at Hobbo. Then he took out an umbrella and opened it behind him. Blood flew in all directions, staining the fabric, but not the killer himself. A clock tower towered above the mansion, illuminated by the light of the moon and small lanterns. Stepping out onto the balcony, Z noted that the Lee estate looked good under the night sky. The system suddenly notified him that changes had been detected in his mental state, and he now received the talent Thirst for Revenge. The guy was surprised that he was able to activate the talent. Wanting to learn more about this, the blonde took advantage of the system's capabilities. Talents could be activated under certain circumstances: mental state, personal experience, and personal characteristics, while skills could be obtained through a special book. Thanks to Thirst for Vengeance, once the blonde deemed someone as an enemy, he could increase skills according to the degree of hatred he had for that person, with the highest percentage of stat increase being 20%. Z never thought that such talent would be so useful. After all, the higher his stats were in the game, the more he could increase them with this talent. This meant that such talent could be improved infinitely. The system notified that the guy had completed the quest, receiving one simple trainer and one piece of bronze-level equipment, and was now asking if he wanted to take it now. After thinking for a bit, the blonde decided to take the equipment first. He was given a piece of equipment from the magician's specialty called the Magic Wand. It allowed one to increase one's magical abilities, and also added 5% to skills and the speed of activating a magical skill, while the speed of energy recovery increased by 20%. Z knew that he couldn't use such a thing, but this equipment was necessary for magicians, so the guy decided to take it to sell in the future. The blonde looked at his storage and was glad that he had automatic collection, and he also noted that the tools for killing people in this game were simply barbaric. When you killed a person, his storage disappeared, and you could not get things from there. You could only examine the corpse and find something interesting. But when players learned ways to kill people, a fight to the death began. Although the game did not encourage this. Seeing the purification pendant in his backpack, Z became interested in the item and decided to look at its characteristics. It added 1 point to energy and had the ability to purify, eliminating negative states of the body, and the freezing time was equal to 12 hours. This thing could save lives during a battle, but the meditation pendant looked useless against its background, so it ended up in the storage. The guy sighed, thinking for a while longer. He then told the system that he wanted to get a coach. A window popped up showing the percentage of the program loaded. The resulting first-level trainer was called the Absolute Slave. It allowed one zombie to be enslaved, whose strength did not exceed the strength of the owner, while the zombie slave had to obey all orders of the owner, protecting him even under the threat of his own life, and the corpse also possessed a part of the owner's panel so the player could develop with him. But if the dead man died, the trainer lost his strength. The guy was shocked that he could get a zombie as a slave. He even pinched himself to check if he was dreaming all this. Z thought about the abilities of the dead man he could obtain. The blonde also realized that if this zombie was truly completely loyal to him, then he would be able to avoid all the dirty work. Ever since the boy found out that Yao had betrayed him, he could no longer trust anyone and was planning to be alone for the rest of his life. But since he now had a hard-working dead man to accompany him, perhaps his heart wounds could be healed. Z asked the system if this trainer's efficiency would increase if he raised his level. She replied that with each new level, the guy would be able to get another zombie slave. The blonde imagined himself commanding an army of the dead, but dismissed the thought as too unrealistic. However, he still wondered how much he had to level up to achieve such a result. Z also thought about which zombies were best suited for slavery, and decided that the ones that were most suitable were the ones that were supposed to progress to the status of zombie kings. And although all the zombies had potential, it seemed to the boy that after they became his slaves, they would no longer be able to make as much progress as before. Leaving these thoughts behind, Z decided to go down to the Lee family's basement. where, according to rumors, many treasures were hidden. After walking down a long corridor, the blonde finally came across the right door. Entering the room, the guy saw a lot of precious jewelry and gold. But now that the end of the world had come, all these things were worth nothing. In this place, as useful things, Z found dubious scrolls with some inscriptions and a knife in which precious stones were inserted. The blonde man left a real mess in the Lee family basement after himself. When the guy found himself back in the yard, it was already dark. Neither in his past nor in this life had he lived in such a luxurious estate. But today he decided to make up for it. When Z entered the house, he saw a large human figure in front of him. However, the guy was sure that there could not be living people in the room. So the blonde took out a flashlight and, shining it forward, saw the same zombie who, when he was a human, had once tried to protect the girls from Hobbo. He was level 4 with decent stats and an epic level talent where the player's strength could increase as he leveled up. All strength-related items increased effectiveness, and the skills he used only consumed physical strength but not energy. And the dead man had a strike with all his might skill that was worth 50% of his stats. The zombie was very strong, and at night it was completely indistinguishable from a bronze-level boss. And it was an incredible coincidence that the guy had just received the absolute slave trainer and immediately found a suitable undead. Hearing this, the zombie opened his eyes wide in surprise. He stood completely calmly, looking at Z carefully. The blonde even found it strange that the corpse didn't try to attack him. The corpse's energy was only 3 points, and if he were placed in human society, he would be considered feeble-minded. And this fact somewhat disappointed the guy. But overall, the corpse's characteristics were quite good. So Z asked the system if he could choose this zombie as a slave. The system responded that since the dead man's spiritual power was low, then, when all the characteristics were added up, they did not exceed those of the guy. Although the corpse was a bit stupid, his enviable talent and possible obedience won over the blonde. So he agreed with the system when it asked if Z wanted to choose this zombie as the absolute slave. After this, the dead man was surrounded by a red glow. He tensed up, not wanting to obey anyone. The blonde was surprised that the zombie tried to resist. The dead man did not give in for a long time, which made the guy wonder if he would regret his choice. Eventually, the system announced that the enslavement was complete, and now it was time to come up with a name for the zombie. Since this guy was so big, strong, and had epic-level natural strength, Z decided to call him Foolish. After that, the player panel of the Fool was introduced into the system. But it was impossible to restore data about the storage, reputation, experience for killing zombies, and rewards for tasks. He had to develop like an ordinary dead person. He could receive coins for killing zombies, and also had 1% of explosion from equipment and items. Zai didn't believe that this cage was capable of holding a dead person with such characteristics. So he ordered Foolish to prove his strength, which the zombie began to do. He took hold of the iron bars and tried to push them apart. And then the dead man was able to calmly leave the cage. He did not attack the man or react to him in any other way. Expecting something different, Z sighed, but he was still glad that Foolish understood the orders. The blonde put a leather wristband on the zombie. Then the guy revealed the main characteristics of the dead man. Now his strength was 23, his energy was 3, his body quality was 27, and his speed was 18. Z wondered what would happen at night if the zombies already had such high levels. Moving away from the Fool, the blonde ordered to wait until he was asleep and to guard the entrance from unwanted guests. At last the morning came, leaving behind the darkness. The guy woke up and, stretching, headed towards the door. Zai opened the door without hurrying. In the room, he saw his slave and several corpses lying around. For such work, he praised Foolish, who suddenly smiled. Looking at the corpses again, the guy asked, "Didn't you eat the other zombies?" The dead man shook his head, and the blonde was convinced that he really was different from the others. Then Z silently walked into the room, and Foolish watched him. Having taken several cards from the storage, the blonde man set the table. He took the chopsticks, a bowl of salad, and was about to start eating. Suddenly, thick saliva fell loudly onto the floor behind him. The guy turned around, trying to understand what was happening. The Fool diligently pointed his finger at his mouth, and when Z asked if he wanted human food, the dead man nodded his head vigorously.